In the opulent halls of Greystone Manor, a silver chalice gleams under chandelier light, holding not just champagne, but a deadly secret as Lady Beatrice raises it to her lips. A scream shatters the gala poison. She collapses, and the room freezes. Who among the glittering guests ambitious financier, secretive governess, indebted captain, aloof chemist, or the enigmatic Lord Ashburn himself wielded the fatal toxin? Why was the chalice wiped clean of fingerprints? And what dark family curse lurks behind its intricate engravings? Join Hercule Poirot as he unravels a web of betrayal, hidden passages, and shocking confessions in the affair of the Poisoned Chalice. Suspense builds with every clue. Can you guess the killer before Poirot's final revelation? Chapter 1. The gala at Greystone Manor. Chandeliers of Greystone Manor glittered like constellations, trapped in crystal, casting a warm, golden glow over the grand ballroom. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and polished mahogany, mingling with the faint tang of champagne. Guests in tailored evening wear swirled through the room, their laughter and murmured confidences weaving a tapestry of elegance and intrigue. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in his black tie and polished patent leather shoes, stood near a marble pillar, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. His mustache, meticulously waxed, twitched slightly as he absorbed the scene, his mind already cataloging details others would overlook: the tilt of a head, the flicker of a glance, the subtle tightening of a gloved hand around a glass. Greystone Manor, nestled in the rolling hills of Sussex, was the ancestral home of Lord Reginald Ashburn, a man whose wealth was matched only by his reputation for hosting lavish gatherings. Tonight's gala was no exception. The occasion was ostensibly to celebrate the restoration of the manor's famed rose garden, but Poirot suspected deeper motives. Ashburn was not a man to spend thousands on frivolity without purpose. The guest list, a carefully curated blend of aristocrats, financiers, and intellectuals, hinted at something more: a deal, perhaps, or a settling of scores. Poirot sipped his mineral water, served in a delicate flute to blend with the champagne-drinking crowd. He had been invited at the insistence of Lady Beatrice Ashburn, Lord Reginald's elder sister, a woman of formidable intellect and sharper tongue. She had written to Poirot a week prior. Her letter, cryptic yet urgent: Monsieur Poirot, your presence is requested at Greystone. I fear a shadow looms over our celebration. Your little gray cells may be our only salvation. The letter had intrigued him, not least because Lady Beatrice was not prone to dramatics. Her reputation as a philanthropist and patron of the arts was sterling, yet whispers of her ruthless streak in family matters had reached even Poirot's ears. The ballroom was a masterpiece of Regency architecture, its high ceilings adorned with frescoes of cherubs and vines. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, their notes floating above the hum of conversation. Poirot's gaze settled on the central table, where a silver chalice gleamed under the chandelier's light. It was an heirloom Ashburn had boasted earlier, crafted in the 16th century for a Venetian doge and passed down through the family. Tonight, it held pride of place, filled with a ruby red wine that shimmered like liquid garnet. Guests toasted with their own glasses, but the chalice was reserved for a ceremonial sip later in the evening, a tradition Lady Beatrice insisted on upholding. Poirot's attention shifted to the guests. There was Mr. Edward Harrow, a financier, with a hawkish face and a reputation for ruthless investments. His eyes darted nervously toward Lord Ashburn, who stood near the fireplace, laughing heartily with a group of diplomats. Harrow's fingers toyed with a gold cufflink, a gesture Poirot noted as betraying unease. Nearby, Miss Evelyn Claremont, the governess to Ashburn's young niece, stood apart, her plain black gown a stark contrast to the vibrant silks around her. Her face was composed, but her eyes followed Lady Beatrice with an intensity that piqued Poirot's curiosity. Captain Lionel Worthing, a dashing military man with a rakish smile, was charming a cluster of young women near the buffet. His uniform gleamed with medals, but Poirot had heard rumors of gambling debts and a tarnished reputation. Then there was Dr. Simon Varnell, a chemist whose gaunt frame and spectacles gave him the air of a man more comfortable with test tubes than champagne flutes. He hovered near the chalice, his fingers twitching as if longing to examine it. Poirot filed away these observations, each a thread in the tapestry of suspicion he was beginning to weave. Lady Beatrice herself was a vision in emerald silk, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. She moved through the crowd with the grace of a queen, her smile warm, but her eyes calculating. She paused to speak with Poirot, her voice low and deliberate. "Monsieur Poirot, I trust you are enjoying the evening. I hope you find the company illuminating." "Most illuminating, Lady Beatrice," Poirot replied, his tone polite but probing. "The chalice, it is a magnificent piece. One wonders why it is given such prominence tonight." Her smile tightened, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "A family tradition, nothing more. It symbolizes trust, unity. We Ashburns hold it dear." She excused herself, gliding toward her brother. But Poirot noted the slight tremor in her hand as she adjusted her shawl. The evening progressed, the quartet transitioning to a lively Mozart piece. Guests danced, their shadows swaying across the polished floor. Poirot declined an invitation to waltz, preferring to observe from the sidelines. He noticed Lord Ashburn whispering to Harrow, their heads bent close, the financier's face paling. Miss Claremont slipped away toward the library, her absence brief but noted. Captain Worthing, now slightly flushed from champagne, laughed loudly at a diplomat's joke. Dr. Varnell lingered near the chalice, his gaze fixed on it with an intensity that bordered on obsession. At precisely 10 o'clock, the quartet paused, and Lord Ashburn clapped his hands for attention. "My friends," he announced, his voice booming, "the time has come for our cherished tradition. My sister, Lady Beatrice, will honor us with the first sip from the Ashburn chalice, a symbol of our family's enduring legacy." The crowd parted as Lady Beatrice approached the table. Her expression was serene, but Poirot's keen eyes detected a hesitation in her step. She lifted the chalice, her fingers steady despite the weight of the silver. The room fell silent, all eyes on her. She raised the chalice to her lips, took a delicate sip, and then a gasp tore from her throat. The chalice slipped from her hands, clattering to the floor, wine spilling like blood across the marble. Lady Beatrice clutched her chest, her face contorting in pain. She staggered, her emerald gown crumpling as she collapsed. Screams erupted from the guests, a cacophony of shock and panic. Poirot was at her side in an instant, his small frame moving with surprising agility. He knelt beside her, checking her pulse, but her eyes were already glassy, her breath stilled. "She is dead," Poirot announced, his voice cutting through the chaos. And this, Miss Amos, was no accident. The room froze, the weight of his words sinking in. Lord Ashburn's face drained of color, his hands trembling. Harrow backed away, his cufflink now missing. Poirot noted. Miss Claremont reappeared, her face pale but composed. Captain Worthing stood rooted, his charm replaced by a look of horror. Dr. Varnell stared at the spilled chalice, his expression unreadable. Poirot rose, his eyes sweeping the room. "No one is to leave," he declared. "The police will be summoned, but until they arrive, this is my investigation. The chalice, it must not be touched." He gestured to a footman, who nodded and stood guard over the fallen vessel. The guests murmured, their shock giving way to suspicion. Poirot's mind raced, cataloging every detail. The chalice's gleam, the wine's unnatural sheen, the absence of fingerprints on the silver stem. He approached the chalice, careful not to disturb it, and noted its intricate engravings, roses and thorns, a curious choice for a vessel of trust. The wine set was sharp, tinged with something acrid, not unlike bitter almonds, cyanide, perhaps, or something more exotic. Poirot's little gray cells buzzed with possibilities. He turned to Lord Ashburn, who was now slumped in a chair, his face buried in his hands. "My lord," Poirot said gently. I will need access to the manor. Its rooms, its secrets, the truth. It hides in the details. Ashburn nodded, his voice hoarse. Anything you need, Monsieur Poirot. Find who did this to my sister. Poirot's gaze shifted to the guests, each a potential suspect. Harrow's missing cufflink, Claremont's timely absence, Worthing's flushed demeanor. Varnell's fixation on the chalice each was a puzzle piece. He instructed the footman to lock the ballroom doors, ensuring no one could slip away. The police would come, but Poirot knew the truth lay in the hours before their arrival. He would interrogate, observe, deduce as the guests huddled in groups. Whispering accusations, Poirot stepped back to the pillar, his mind a whirlwind of logic. The chalice, the poison, the motives each pointed to a calculated act. Lady Beatrice's letter had warned of a shadow, and now that shadow had struck. But why her? And why now? The chapter closed with Poirot adjusting his bow tie, his expression resolute. The gala was over, but the investigation had just begun. The truth, he knew, would not elude Hercule Poirot. Chapter 2. The guests under scrutiny. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand library of Greystone Manor, the morning light filtering through tall, arched windows, casting golden streaks across the polished oak floor. The air was heavy with the scent of old leather and wax, the shelves towering with volumes that spoke of the Ashburn family's long, storied history. The gala from the previous night lingered in the atmosphere, not in clinking glasses or laughter, but in the somber weight of Lady Beatrice's death. The silver chalice, now locked away in a police evidence box, had left an indelible mark on the evening, and Poirot's sharp gray eyes scanned the room, already piecing together the puzzle that lay before him. He had requested a private space to conduct his interviews, and Lord Ashburn, still pale and shaken, had offered the library. Without hesitation, the police, led by the competent but unimaginative Inspector Grayson, were busy cataloging the crime scene in the banquet hall. Poirot, however, preferred to work in parallel, trusting his little gray cells to uncover what physical evidence alone could not. The guest list was his starting point, a carefully curated selection of Greystone's elite, each with a potential motive, each a thread in the tapestry of deceit he was determined to unravel. Poirot adjusted his perfectly knotted tie and smoothed his mustache, a ritual that steadied his thoughts. He glanced at the pocket watch dangling from his waistcoat. 9:47 a.m. The first interviewee would arrive shortly. His notebook, small and leather-bound, lay open on the mahogany table before him, its pages already marked with neat, precise notes from his observations at the gala. The scream, the fall, the chalice's gleam, the handkerchief. He had missed nothing. Now, it was time to probe deeper, to peel back the masks worn by the guests. The ambitious financier, Mr. Gerald Harrow. Door creaked open, and Mr. Gerald Harrow entered, his tailored suit impeccable but his posture betraying a faint unease. He was a man in his late 40s, with sharp features and a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Poirot had noted him at the gala, always at the edge of conversations, his laughter too loud, his glances too calculated. Harrow was a financier, known for turning modest investments into fortunes, though whispers of shady dealings followed him like a shadow. Monsieur Harrow, Poirot began, his voice smooth and accented. I thank you for your time. Please, be seated. Harrow sat, crossing one leg over the other, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. Of course, Monsieur Poirot, a dreadful business. This, poor Lady Beatrice. Indeed, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing slightly. You are acquainted with her, non? Harrow nodded, his smile tightening. Professionally, yes. She was a generous patron of several charitable funds I manage. A remarkable woman. Poirot tilted his head, his expression unreadable. And yet, generosity can breed resentment, can it not? Perhaps there were those who felt her wealth was misallocated. Harrow's fingers paused, then resumed their rhythm. I wouldn't know about that. My dealings with her were strictly business. Poirot made a small note in his book, the scratch of his pen deliberate. Tell me, monsieur, where were you when Lady Beatrice collapsed? Near the orchestra, Harrow replied quickly. I was speaking with Lord Ashburn about a potential investment in his estate's restoration. Poirot's mustache twitched. And you saw nothing unusual? No one near the chalice before it reached her hands. Harrow shook his head, but his eyes darted briefly to the left. It was a crowded room. People were milling about. I wasn't paying attention to the chalice. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but probing. And yet, you were seen near the banquet table earlier, monsieur. A servant recalls you lingering there, adjusting your cufflinks. The chalice was on that table, was it not? Harrow's smile faltered. I may have passed by. I don't recall. It was a busy evening. Poirot nodded, as if satisfied, though his mind was already cataloging the financier's hesitations. He dismissed Harrow with a polite smile. But as the man left, Poirot's gaze lingered on the door. Harrow's ambition was palpable, and ambition, Poirot knew, was a dangerous fuel. The secretive governess, Miss Eleanor Claremont. Next came Miss Eleanor Claremont, the governess to Lord Ashburn's young niece. She entered with the grace of someone accustomed to moving unnoticed, her plain gray dress blending into the room's muted tones. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her eyes, though sharp, avoided direct contact. Poirot had observed her at the gala, always on the fringes, watching rather than engaging, her presence almost ghostly. Mademoiselle Claremont, Poirot said, gesturing to the chair. You are, I understand, responsible for the education of young Miss Ashburn. A weighty responsibility. She nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Yes, Monsieur Poirot. I've been with the family for 3 years. And Lady Beatrice? Poirot asked, his tone gentle but insistent. You knew her well. Miss Claremont hesitated, her fingers tightening. She was a kind but distant. My duties kept me with the child, not the family's social circle. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Yet you were at the gala. None. An unusual invitation for a governess. Her cheeks flushed slightly. Lord Ashburn insisted. He values loyalty, and I've served faithfully. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. Loyalty is a fine quality. But tell me, mademoiselle, did you notice anything peculiar last night, perhaps near the chalice? Her eyes flicked up, meeting his for a fleeting moment before dropping again. I was with Miss Ashburn most of the evening. I didn't see the chalice until it happened. Poirot made another note, his pen moving with precision. And this handkerchief, he said, producing a small square of linen from his pocket, monogrammed with the initials AC. It was found near the banquet table. Yours, I presume. Miss Claremont's breath caught, but she recovered quickly. I must have dropped it. I was near the table earlier, fetching a glass of water for Miss Ashburn. Poirot's smile was enigmatic, of course, a simple oversight. He dismissed her, but as she left, he traced the monogram with his finger. The handkerchief was silk, far finer than a governess's salary should afford. A clue, perhaps, or a careless mistake. The charming Captain Lionel Worthing strode in, with the confidence of a man used to command, his military bearing evident despite his civilian attire. His blonde hair was neatly combed, and his blue eyes held a roguish charm, though Poirot noted a faint strain in his expression. Worthing had been a favorite at the gala, his laughter drawing crowds. But Poirot had seen him falter when Lady Beatrice collapsed, his hand tightening on his glass. Captain Worthing, Poirot began, you are a man of action. Yes, a war hero, I am told. Worthing grinned, though it was strained. I served my country, Monsieur Poirot. Now I'm just a guest who stumbled into a tragedy. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A tragedy, indeed. You were close to Lady Beatrice, were you not? I observed you speaking with her earlier in the evening. Worthing's grin faded. We exchanged pleasantries. She was a gracious host. Gracious. Yes, Poirot said, his voice soft, but perhaps not always kind. There are rumors, Captain, of debts. Yours, specifically. Lady Beatrice was known to be unforgiving in financial matters. Worthing's jaw tightened. I owe money, like many men. But I didn't kill her over it. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Then why, Captain, did you leave the banquet hall shortly before her collapse? A servant saw you slip out. Toward the gardens, Worthing's face paled, but he held Poirot's gaze. I needed air. The room was stifling. Poirot made a note, his expression unreadable. And the chalice? Did you see anyone tamper with it? No, Worthing said firmly. I was nowhere near it. Poirot nodded, dismissing him. But his mind was already at work. Worthing's charm was a shield, but beneath it lay desperation. The gardens, the debts, the timing, each was a piece of the puzzle. The aloof chemist, Dr. Simon Varnell's final interviewee was Dr. Simon Varnell, a chemist whose gaunt frame and sharp eyes gave him the air of a man who preferred books to people. Poirot had noticed him at the gala, standing alone, his gaze fixed on Lady Beatrice with an intensity that bordered on unsettling. Varnell's reputation as a brilliant but eccentric scientist preceded him, and Poirot was eager to probe his mind. Dr. Varnell, Poirot said, gesturing to the chair. Your work, it is with chemicals, yes, poisons. Perhaps Varnell's lips twitched, not quite a smile. I study compounds, Monsieur Poirot. Some are toxic, yes, but my work is academic, not criminal. Poirot's mustache curved slightly. And yet, Lady Beatrice was poisoned. A coincidence, perhaps, that a chemist was present. Varnell's eyes narrowed. You suspect me because of my profession. That's lazy reasoning. Poirot chuckled softly. I suspect everyone, Doctor, until I do not. Tell me, where were you when Lady Beatrice fell? In the library, Varnell said, his tone clipped. I was examining a rare volume on toxicology. The butler can confirm it. Poirot made a note, his pen steady. And your relationship with Lady Beatrice, professional, Varnell said. She funded some of my early research, but we parted ways years ago. She thought my work too speculative. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Speculative, a polite word for dangerous, non. He produced a small vial label found near the banquet table. This bears the name of a rare toxin, familiar to you, perhaps. Varnell's face remained impassive, but his fingers twitched. It's a common compound in my field. Anyone could have acquired it. Poirot nodded, dismissing him, but his mind was alight. Varnell's alibi was strong, but his knowledge of poisons was undeniable. The label was a clue. But to what? The mental map as the library grew quiet. Poirot closed his notebook and leaned back, his eyes half closed. The interviews had painted a vivid picture. Harrow's ambition, Claremont's secrecy, Worthing's desperation, Varnell's detachment. Each had a motive, each a moment near the chalice. The handkerchief, the label, the garden exit, these were threads, but the pattern was not yet clear. He rose, pacing the room, his mind sketching a mental map of the gala. The banquet table had been central. The chalice placed there during the toasts. Guests had moved freely, their paths crisscrossing. Like a dance, Harrow had lingered, Claremont had passed by, Worthing had slipped out, Varnell had been absent. The passage of time, the placement of objects, the flicker of guilt and a glance Poirot's mind catalogued it all. He paused by the window, gazing at the manicured gardens below. The handkerchief troubled him most. Its silk, its monogram, its placement near the chalice. It was to deliberate to be accidental. Miss Claremont's explanation was plausible, but her demeanor betrayed more. And Harrow's unease, Worthing's debts, Varnell's knowledge, each was a piece. But the whole eluded him. Poirot returned to the table, his fingers tracing the edge of his notebook. The mystery was deepening, but he felt the thrill of the chase. The guests were under scrutiny, their secrets laid bare. Yet the truth remained just out of reach. He would need to dig deeper, to probe the manor itself, to find the thread that tied the clues together. As he prepared to leave the library, a faint sound caught his ear, a rustle, like paper slipping to the floor. He turned, his eyes scanning the room, and there, beneath a chair, was a folded note, unnoticed until now. He retrieved it, unfolding it carefully. A single line, written in a hurried hand: "The chalice hides more than poison." Poirot's lips curved into a smile. The game, as he often said, was afoot. Chapter 3. The alchemist's secret. Morning sun filtered through the tall, mullioned windows of Greystone Manor, casting long shadows across the polished oak floors. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand library, his small, precise figure a stark contrast to the towering bookshelves that lined the walls. His mustache twitched as he surveyed the room, his gray eyes sharp and inquisitive. The gala at Greystone Manor had ended in tragedy the previous night with Lady Beatrice Ashburn's death by poison, and now the manor buzzed with an undercurrent of suspicion. Poirot, ever methodical, had begun his investigation in earnest, and his attention had turned to Dr. Ezekiel Varnell, the aloof chemist whose guarded demeanor had piqued the detective's curiosity. Poirot's polished shoes clicked softly as he crossed the library toward a side door, which, according to the manor's butler, led to a private wing where Dr. Varnell maintained a small laboratory. The butler, a weary man named Jenkins with a perpetually furrowed brow, had been reluctant to share details but had confirmed that Varnell often retreated there to conduct his experiments. Poirot's interest in the chemist stemmed from a single, fleeting observation during the gala. Varnell's hands, stained faintly with a greenish residue, had hovered near his glass with a peculiar hesitance, as though he feared contamination. It was a small detail, but to Poirot, such details were the threads that unraveled the tapestry of a crime. The door to the laboratory was heavy, made of dark mahogany, and bore a brass plaque engraved with Varnell's name. Poirot knocked once, then twice, his knuckles rapping sharply. No response came. He tested the handle, finding it unlocked, and stepped inside. The air was thick with the acrid scent of chemicals, and the room itself was a labyrinth of glassware and scientific instruments. Beakers bubbled gently on a burner, their contents a murky amber. Shelves lined with vials and jars stretched to the ceiling, each labeled in Varnell's meticulous script. A long workbench dominated the center, cluttered with notebooks, pipettes, and a microscope that gleamed under the light of a single, unshaded bulb. Poirot's eyes swept the room, cataloging every detail. A small sink in the corner bore traces of the same greenish residue he had noticed on Varnell's hands. A locked cabinet in the far wall caught his attention, its keyhole gleaming as though recently polished. He approached it, his fingers brushing the cool metal, but he did not attempt to force it open. Instead, he turned to the workbench, where an open journal lay, its pages filled with dense, handwritten notes. The script was precise, almost obsessive, detailing experiments with compounds Poirot did not immediately recognize. One entry, dated a week prior, stood out: compound X17, stable at low temperatures, lethal in microdoses, undetectable by standard toxicology, requires further refinement. Poirot's lips pursed. Undetectable poisons were the stuff of fiction, or so most believed. But he knew better. In his long career, he had encountered toxins so subtle they baffled even the most skilled coroners. He flipped through the journal, noting references to belladonna, aconite, and a rare alkaloid derived from a South American plant. The latter intrigued him most. Its description matched the symptoms Lady Beatrice had exhibited: convulsions, dilated pupils, and a rapid collapse. He made a mental note to consult the coroner's report, which was due later that day. The creak of the door startled him, and Poirot turned to see Dr. Varnell himself standing in the threshold. The chemist was a tall, gaunt man in his late 40s, with thinning hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to carry the weight of too many sleepless nights. His coat was slightly askew, and his hands, now clean of any residue, fidgeted at his sides. "Monsieur Poirot," Varnell said, his voice clipped but polite. "I was not expecting visitors in my laboratory." Poirot offered a small, disarming smile. "Forgive the intrusion, Dr. Varnell. When a lady dies of poison at a gala, it is only natural that one's curiosity turns to the chemist in attendance, n'est-ce pas?" Varnell's jaw tightened, but he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I suppose you're here to accuse me of murder." "Not at all," Poirot replied, his tone light but his eyes unyielding. "I am here to understand your work. It fascinates me. These compounds," he gestured to the journal, "they suggest a man of great skill, perhaps one who could create a poison so subtle it leaves no trace." Varnell's eyes narrowed. "You've been reading my notes." "A glance only," Poirot said, waving a hand dismissively, "but enough to see that you are no ordinary chemist. Tell me, doctor, what is this compound X17? The question hung in the air, heavy as the chemical fumes. Varnell hesitated, then crossed to the workbench, his movements deliberate. "It's a theoretical compound," he said at last. "A project I abandoned months ago, too unstable for practical use." "And yet," Poirot said, tapping the journal, "you wrote of it only last week." Varnell's fingers twitched, betraying his unease. "A passing thought, nothing more." Poirot nodded, as though satisfied, but his mind was racing. He changed tack, his voice softening. "You knew Lady Beatrice well, I understand. A professional acquaintance, perhaps." Varnell's expression darkened. "She was no friend of mine. Beatrice Ashburn was a meddler. She sat on the board of the Royal Chemical Society and used her influence to block my funding. She called my work dangerous, unethical. She cost me years of progress. A motive, then," Poirot said, almost to himself, "to rid yourself of an obstacle." "I didn't kill her," Varnell snapped, his voice rising. He caught himself, lowering his tone. "I was in the conservatory when she collapsed. Jenkins can confirm it. He brought me a drink at precisely 10 o'clock. Poirot's eyebrows rose. "The butler. Yes, a most convenient alibi. And yet, doctor, the poison that killed Lady Beatrice was no common toxin. It required expertise, access to rare substances. Substances, perhaps, like those in this very room." Varnell's face flushed, but he held Poirot's gaze. "I'm not the only chemist in England, Poirot, and I'm not fool enough to poison someone at a gala I attended." Poirot inclined his head, conceding the point for now. He turned his attention to a small pile of papers tucked beneath the journal. A torn label from a vial, caught his eye. It bore a faint inscription, "A. Serpentina, 0.1 grams." He recognized the name immediately. Alstonia serpentina, a plant known for its toxic alkaloids. The label was crumpled, as though someone had tried to discard it hastily. Poirot slipped it into his pocket without Varnell noticing, his movements as smooth as a conjurer's. "Tell me, doctor," Poirot said, steering the conversation away from the label. "Who else had access to this laboratory?" "No one," Varnell said quickly. "I keep it locked when I'm not here, and yet the door was unlocked when I arrived." Poirot pointed out. Varnell faltered. "I must have forgotten. I was distracted last night. By the gala, or by something else." Poirot's tone was gentle, but his eyes were sharp as they studied Varnell's reaction. The chemist turned away, busying himself with rearranging a row of vials. "I have work to do, Poirot, if you have no further questions." "But I do," Poirot interrupted, stepping closer. "One final matter. The chalice from which Lady Beatrice drank it was a curious piece. Was it not? Silver, intricately designed, with a faint residue inside. Did you, perhaps, examine it during the gala?" Varnell's hand stilled. "I had no reason to touch the chalice," No reason, Poirot echoed, his voice almost a whisper. And yet, doctor, I wonder. He left the laboratory without another word, his mind a whirl of possibilities. Varnell's alibi, confirmed by Jenkins, was solid, but alibis could be fabricated, witnesses swayed. The journal, the label, the unlocked door, these were pieces of a puzzle that did not yet fit. Poirot descended the manor's grand staircase, his thoughts turning to the coroner's report. If the poison was indeed derived from Alstonia serpentina, it would confirm his suspicions about the laboratory. But Varnell's demeanor, his quick defensiveness, suggested a man with secrets, not necessarily a murderer outside. The manor's gardens were alive with the hum of bees and the rustle of leaves. Poirot paused by a rose bush, his fingers brushing the petals as he considered his next move, the handkerchief he had found near the chalice, monogrammed with the letter C, did not match Varnell's initials. It pointed elsewhere, perhaps to Miss Claremont, the governess, or Captain Worthing. But the poison, that was the key. Its rarity narrowed the field, and Varnell's laboratory was the most likely source. He made his way to the drawing room, where Jenkins awaited with the coroner's preliminary findings. The butler handed him a sealed envelope, his expression unreadable. Poirot opened it. Scanning the typed pages, the poison was confirmed as an alkaloid, likely from a plant source. Though the exact compound was still under analysis, the dosage had been minute but potent, delivered via the chalice. No fingerprints were found on the chalice itself, only a faint smudge, as though it had been wiped clean. Poirot folded the report, his mind returning to Varnell. The chemist's alibi held, but the label in Poirot's pocket suggested otherwise. He resolved to test Varnell's story further, perhaps by observing him in a less guarded moment. For now, though, he eliminated Varnell as the primary suspect. The man's expertise was undeniable, but his actions lacked the calculated malice of a killer. The true culprit, Poirot sensed, was still at large, hiding behind a mask of civility. As he stepped into the manor's hall, the weight of the mystery settled over him. The chalice, the poison, the hidden motives, they formed a web that only patience and precision could unravel. Poirot straightened his tie, his resolve firm. The alchemist's secret was but one thread in the tapestry, and he would follow it to its end. Chapter 4. The captain's confession. The morning after the gala at Greystone Manor dawned with a heavy mist, clinging to the estate's sprawling lawns, as if the very air held its breath in anticipation of the truth. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, stood in the manor's grand library, his small, precise hands clasped behind his back. The room smelled of old leather and polished wood, its towering shelves laden with volumes that whispered of the Ashburn family storied past. Yet, Poirot's attention was not on the books, but on the man before him, Captain Julian Worthing, whose charming smile had faltered under the weight of the previous night's tragedy. Captain Worthing, a man in his early 30s with the weathered, good looks of a soldier turned adventurer, sat rigidly in a high-backed chair. His navy blue jacket, adorned with faded regimental insignia, seemed to hang heavier on his frame today. His eyes, a striking hazel, darted toward the window, as though seeking escape from the Belgian detective's piercing gaze. Poirot, however, was not one to be evaded. His mustache twitched slightly, a telltale sign of his mind at work. As he paced slowly before the captain, "Monsieur Worthing," Poirot began, his voice soft yet commanding, "you will agree, I think, that the events of last night demand clarity. The death of Lady Beatrice was no accident, and the truth, it hides itself like a fox in the underbrush. But Hercule Poirot, he is a most excellent hunter." Worthing shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tightening around the armrests. "I've told you everything I know, Mr. Poirot. I was in the ballroom when it happened, dancing with Miss Langley, as half a dozen witnesses can confirm. I had no reason to harm Lady Beatrice." Poirot tilted his head, his green eyes gleaming with quiet intensity. "No reason You say, yet the heart, it has its secrets, does it not? And secrets, Captain, they have a way of slipping through the cracks, like sand through the fingers. The captain's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Poirot paused, allowing the silence to press against Worthing's resolve. The detective had already learned much about the captain in the hours since the poisoning. Worthing was a man of charisma and ambition, but also one burdened by debts that clung to him like barnacles to a ship's hull. His military career, though decorated, had ended abruptly under whispers of scandal, and his presence at Greystone Manor was as much a bid for social redemption as it was an obligation to Lord Ashburn, an old regimental comrade. Poirot's inquiries had also revealed a more personal connection. Servants' gossip, carefully sifted, hinted at a closeness between Worthing and Lady Beatrice that went beyond mere acquaintance. The maids had whispered of stolen glances and private meetings in the Manor's rose garden. Poirot, ever attuned to the subtleties of human behavior, had noted Worthing's flushed cheeks when Beatrice's name was mentioned during the initial interviews. Now, in the library, Poirot intended to pry open the captain's carefully guarded heart. "Let us speak plainly, Captain," Poirot said, stopping his pacing to face Worthing directly. "You and Lady Beatrice, you were, how shall I say, more than friends, perhaps. The eyes, they betray what the lips conceal." Worthing's face paled, and for a moment, Poirot thought the man might bolt from the chair. Instead, he leaned forward, his hands gripping the armrest so tightly his knuckles whitened. "You're fishing, Poirot," he said, his voice low and strained. "I admire Beatrice. Yes, she was a remarkable woman, beautiful, sharp-witted. But that's all." Poirot raised an eyebrow, his expression one of polite skepticism. "Admiration, it is a fine thing, but it does not explain why you were seen leaving her private parlor 2 nights ago, Captain. Nor does it explain the letter found in your coat pocket, a letter in Lady Beatrice's hand, urging you to end this madness before it destroys you both." Worthing's eyes widened, and he shot to his feet, his composure unraveling. "How did you—" "That letter was private. You've no right to pry into my affairs." Poirot remained unruffled, his voice calm but unyielding. "When murder is committed, Captain, all affairs become the affair of Hercule Poirot. The letter, it was discovered by my good friend Inspector Japp, who is most thorough in his searches. Now, you will tell me the truth, or I shall be forced to draw my own conclusions, and they may not be kind." Worthing sank back into the chair, his shoulders slumping as though the weight of the world had settled upon them. For a long moment he stared at the floor, his breath uneven. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he began to speak. "It's true," he said. "Beatrice and I, we were lovers. It began last summer, during her stay in Brighton. She was unhappy, trapped in a life of duty to her brother and this crumbling estate. I offered her an escape, I suppose. But it was more than that. I loved her, Poirot, truly." Poirot nodded, his expression softening slightly, though his eyes remained sharp. "And yet, this love, it ended badly, did it not? The letter speaks of threats, of exposure. What happened, Captain?" Worthing ran a hand through his dark hair, his face etched with anguish. "She wanted to end it, said it was too dangerous, that if Ashburn found out, he'd ruin me. I was already drowning in debt gambling, mostly. I thought I could win enough to start anew, maybe take Beatrice away from all this. But she wouldn't hear of it. She said she'd tell Ashburn everything if I didn't leave her alone. I begged her to reconsider, but she was adamant. That night, in her parlor, we argued. She was furious, said I betrayed her trust." Poirot's mustache twitched again, a sign that a piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. "And this argument, it was 2 nights before the gala. Yet, at the gala, you were seen near the banquet table where the chalice stood. A curious coincidence, none." Worthing's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with indignation. "I didn't touch the chalice, Poirot. I swear it, yes. I was near the table. I was fetching a glass of champagne for Miss Langley. But I had no reason to kill Beatrice. I loved her, even if she didn't love me anymore." Poirot studied the captain closely, his mind sifting through the man's words, tone, and body language. Worthing's distress seemed genuine, but Poirot had seen many. A guilty man feign innocence with equal conviction. The detective's thoughts turned to the chalice itself, silver, ornate, and curiously free of fingerprints, as though wiped clean. The poison, a rare alkaloid, had been identified by the police chemist, but its source remained elusive. Worthing's proximity to the chalice, combined with his motive, made him a compelling suspect. Yet Poirot sensed the truth was not so simple. "Very well, Captain," Poirot said at last, his tone measured. "Let us test your story. You say you were dancing with Miss Langley when Lady Beatrice drank from the chalice. But the ballroom, it is large, and the crowd, it moves like the tides. Perhaps you slipped away for a moment, unnoticed." Worthing shook his head vehemently. "No, I was with her the entire time. Ask her yourself, she'll tell you." Poirot inclined his head. "Oh, I shall, Captain. But first, let us take a walk. The gardens, they are most lovely this morning, and I find that fresh air, it clears the mind." Worthing looked puzzled but rose to follow Poirot, who led the way through the manor's French doors and into the meticulously tended gardens. The mist had begun to lift, revealing rose bushes heavy with dew and gravel paths that crunched underfoot. Poirot's pace was leisurely, but his purpose was anything but. He had learned from a footman that Worthing had been seen in the gardens shortly before the gala, near a secluded arbor where Beatrice often took her evening walks. If Worthing had hidden something of vial, perhaps, or another clue, it might still be their dot. As they approached the arbor, Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the ground. The gravel was disturbed in places, as though someone had paced or scuffled. He knelt, his gloved fingers brushing aside a few leaves to reveal a small, glinting object half buried in the dirt, a cufflink, engraved with the initials J.W. Worthing's face drained of color. As Poirot held it up to the light, "Yours, I presume?" Poirot asked, his voice deceptively mild. Worthing stammered, I must have dropped it. I was here. Yes, but only to clear my head before the gala. I swear, Poirot, I didn't." His words were cut off by a sudden, desperate lunge. Worthing bolted, his boots kicking up gravel as he sprinted toward the garden's edge, where a low hedge separated the manor grounds from the surrounding woods. Poirot, though small and unassuming, was not without resource. He shouted for the footman stationed nearby, who gave chase with surprising speed. The pursuit was brief but dramatic, with Worthing stumbling over a root and tumbling into the grass, where he was swiftly apprehended by the burly servants. Poirot approached, his expression one of mild disapproval. "Captain Worthing, this is most undignified. If you are innocent, as you claim, why do you flee like a guilty man?" Worthing, panting and disheveled, glared up at Poirot. "Because I know how this looks. The letter, the cufflink, my debt shall pin this on me, and I'll hang for it. But I didn't kill her. Poirot, I couldn't." Poirot regarded him for a long moment, his mind racing. The cufflink was damning, but it was also curiously convenient, almost too convenient, as though placed to be found, and Worthing's flight, while foolish, spoke more of panic than calculated guilt. Poirot's thoughts turned to the other guests, particularly the financier, Mr. Harrow, whose sharp glances during the gala had not escaped the detective's notice. Could Worthing be a scapegoat, a pawn in a larger game? Before Poirot could press further, Inspector Japp arrived, his face flushed from a brisk walk from the manor. "Well, Poirot, you've got him on the run already. What's this about a cufflink?" Poirot handed the item to Japp, explaining its discovery. "It is a clue, mon ami, but perhaps not the one we seek. Captain Worthing, he has much to explain, but I am not yet convinced He is our poisoner. We must verify his alibi, Mademoiselle Langley. She will tell us if he was truly with her when the chalice was touched." Jab nodded, scribbling in his notebook. "Right, I'll have her brought in. But this one's not going anywhere." He gestured to the footman, who kept a firm grip on Worthing's arms. Poirot turned back to the captain, his voice low but firm. "You will remain here, Captain, until we have spoken with Miss Langley. If your story holds, you may yet walk free. But if you conceal anything further, I assure you, the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot will uncover it." The interrogation of Miss Langley took place in the Manor's drawing room, a space adorned with velvet drapes and portraits of stern-faced Ashburns. Miss Langley, a petite woman with auburn hair and a nervous demeanor, confirmed Worthing's account was surprising. "Certainly, he was with me, Mr. Poirot," she said, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. "We danced 3 waltzes in a row, and he never left my side. I'm sure of it." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "You are certain, mademoiselle?" The ballroom. It was crowded, and the lights, they were dim. A man might slip away for a moment. "Non." Miss Langley shook her head. "No, sir. Julian Captain Worthing was with me the whole time. I'd have noticed if he left. He was very attentive." Poirot noted the blush that crept into her cheeks and filed it away for later consideration. Her testimony was clear, and several other guests corroborated it, placing Worthing at the far end of the ballroom when Beatrice collapsed. Yet, the cufflink and the letter gnawed at Poirot's mind. If Worthing was innocent of the poisoning, why had he run? And who had placed the cufflink in the garden? As the day wore on, Poirot returned to the banquet hall, where the chalice remained under police guard. He examined it once more, noting its weight, the smoothness of its surface, and the faint residue of the poison within. The absence of fingerprints suggested deliberation, but the cufflink suggested carelessness, a contradiction that intrigued him. He began to suspect that the true culprit had orchestrated a trail of clues to mislead, a trail that pointed to neatly at Worthing. By evening, Poirot had Worthing detained in a guest room under watch, not as a murderer, but as a man with too many secrets. The detective stood alone in the banquet hall, his eyes tracing the room's opulent details, the chandeliers, the tapestries, the long table where the chalice had stood. He sensed that the answer lay not only in the motives of the guests, but in the manor itself, in its hidden corners and whispered histories. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the hall, Poirot's mind turned to the other suspects: Mr. Harrow's financial troubles, Miss Claremont's secretive demeanor, and Lord Ashburn's strained relationship with his sister all demanded scrutiny. The cufflink, the letter, the chalice, they were pieces of a puzzle. But the picture remained incomplete. Poirot straightened his tie, his resolve unshaken. The truth, he knew, was close, and he would find it, no matter how cleverly it was hidden. The chapter drew to a close with Worthing's fate hanging in the balance, his guilt or innocence unresolved. Poirot's investigation had peeled back one layer of the mystery, revealing the captain's tangled heart. But the deeper truth, the identity of the poisoner, remained elusive. The detective's little gray cells hummed with anticipation, ready to unravel the next thread in the affair of the poisoned chalice. Chapter 5. The governess's shadow. Hercule Poirot adjusted his impeccable black tie as he stood in the dimly lit corridor of Greystone Manor, the echoes of the galest tragedy still reverberating through its stone walls. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and wax, but beneath it lingered a faint trace of something sharper, suspicion, perhaps, or the ghost of Lady Beatrice's final moments. Poirot's gray eyes, sharp as a falcon's, scanned the hallway leading to Miss Claremont's quarters. The governess had intrigued him from the moment he observed her at the gala. Her reserved posture, the way her hands trembled slightly when Lady Beatrice's name was mentioned, and the fleeting glance she cast toward the silver chalice before it was whisked away for analysis. There was something more to her. Poirot was certain, a shadow cast by secrets she guarded with fierce determination. The morning sun filtered through the manor's tall windows, casting long, slanted beams across the parquet floor. Poirot had risen early, his mind already piecing together the puzzle of the poisoned chalice. The previous night's interviews had painted a vivid picture of the gala's attendees. Mr. Harrow's nervous ambition, Captain Worthing's desperate charm, Dr. Varnell's aloof precision, and now, Miss Claremont, the enigmatic governess who seemed to hover on the edges of every scene, a notice yet ever present. Poirot's little gray cells, as he liked to call them, were buzzing with possibilities. The monogrammed handkerchief he had found near the chalice bore the initials EC. Could it belong to Eleanor Claremont, or was it a deliberate misdirection planted to obscure the truth? He knocked softly on the door to Miss Claremont's room, his gloved hand producing a crisp, polite sound. There was a pause, then the faint rustle of fabric and the creak of a floorboard. The door opened, revealing Miss Claremont, her pale face framed by a simple gray dress and a tightly pinned bun of chestnut hair. Her eyes, a muted hazel, met Poirot's with a guarded intensity. Like a deer sensing a predator in the underbrush, Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice low and steady, though her fingers tightened briefly on the doorframe. I did not expect you so early. How may I assist you? Poirot offered a small, courteous smile, his mustache twitching slightly. Mademoiselle Claremont, it is precisely because it is early that I come. The truth, it hides in the quiet moments when one is not yet prepared to conceal it. May I enter? She hesitated, her gaze flickering toward the interior of her room before she stepped aside. Of course, please. The room was modest, almost austere, a stark contrast to the opulence of Greystone Manor's public spaces. A narrow bed with a plain quilt, a small writing desk cluttered with books and papers, and a single chair by a window overlooking the gardens. Poirot's eyes swept the space, noting every detail, the worn spine of a French novel, the ink stains on the desk, and a faint scent of lavender that clung to the air. He gestured to the chair, inviting Miss Claremont to sit, while he remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. Mademoiselle, you were present at the gala when Lady Beatrice met her unfortunate end. He began, his tone measured but probing. I observe that you are a woman of great composure, yet I sense a certain, how shall I say, unease when her name is mentioned. Perhaps you can tell me why? Miss Claremont's lips pressed into a thin line, and she folded her hands in her lap, her knuckles whitening. Lady Beatrice was my employer's sister, Monsieur Poirot. Her death was a shock to us all. I am merely grieving, as any would. Poirot tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. Grieving, yes, but there is something more. I think, you see, mademoiselle, I have made it my business to study the human heart, your grief. It is tinged with something else, fear, perhaps, or guilt. Her face paled further, but she held his gaze. You are mistaken, monsieur. I have nothing to fear, and certainly nothing to feel guilty for. I was in the ballroom when Lady Beatrice collapsed, as many others were. Many others. Poirot agreed, pacing slowly toward the desk. Yet not all of them dropped. A handkerchief near the chalice, embroidered with the initials. You see, Miss Claremont's breath caught a sharp, involuntary sound that seemed to echo in the small room. A handkerchief, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. I have several, but I assure you, I did not drop one near the chalice. Someone could have taken it, or it could belong to another. Poirot raised a hand, as if to silence her protests. Let us not rush to conclusions, mademoiselle. The handkerchief, it is a clue, but not yet the solution. Tell me, what was your relationship with Lady Beatrice? You were governess to Lord Ashburn's children, were you not? Yet I hear whispers that you knew Lady Beatrice's late husband, Sir Henry. The mention of Sir Henry seemed to strike her like a physical blow. Her shoulders stiffened, and her eyes darted to the window, as if seeking escape in the distant gardens. Sir Henry was a kind man, she said after a long pause, her voice softer now, almost wistful. I met him years ago. Before I came to Greystone Manor, he was a friend to my family, nothing more. Poirot's mustache twitched again, a sign that his little gray cells were at work. A friend, you say? Yet I hear that Lady Beatrice was not fond of those who were close to her husband. She was, perhaps, possessive, jealous, even. Miss Claremont's fingers twisted in her lap, and she looked down. Avoiding his gaze, Lady Beatrice had her reasons for her feelings, Monsieur Poirot. I do not judge her for them. My role here is to care for the children, not to meddle in family affairs. Poirot nodded, as if satisfied, but his eyes remained sharp. Very well, mademoiselle. But let us speak of the gala. You were near the refreshment table shortly before Lady Beatrice took her fatal sip, were you not? I have it from a footman that you lingered there, adjusting your shawl. Perhaps watching the chalice. I was adjusting my shawl, she said, quickly, her voice rising slightly. It was chilly in the ballroom, and I stepped near the table to warm myself by the candles. I did not touch the chalice, nor did I see anyone else do so. Poirot's smile was almost imperceptible. Candles, mademoiselle, an interesting choice for warmth, when the fireplaces of Greystone Manor are so grand. But let us move on. I would like to see your correspondence, if you please. Letters, notes, anything that might shed light on your activities. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, Poirot thought she might refuse. But then she rose, her movement stiff, and crossed to the desk. She opened a drawer and produced a small bundle of letters tied with a ribbon. These are personal, she said, her tone offensive. But I have nothing to hide. Poirot took the bundle, his gloved fingers deftly untying the ribbon. The letters were mundane at first, notes from a cousin in London, a thank you from a former pupil's mother, but one caught his eye. It was written in a precise, unfamiliar hand. The ink slightly faded, and the words were arranged in an odd, almost rhythmic pattern. He held it to the light, his brow furrowing. This letter, mademoiselle, he said, holding it up. It is not like the others. The phrasing, it is, how shall I say, deliberately obscure, a code. Perhaps Miss Claremont's face drained of color, and she took a step back, her hand gripping the edge of the desk. It's nothing, she stammered. A letter from an old friend, written in jest. It means nothing. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. Just, mademoiselle. I think not. The mind of Hercule Poirot, it does not mistake a code for a jest. This letter speaks of a meeting. Does it not? A time? A place, perhaps a purpose? She shook her head, her composure cracking further. You're wrong, monsieur. It's just a letter. I swear it. Poirot set the letter down carefully, his mind racing. The code was simple, a substitution cipher, and he suspected it would yield its secrets with a few hours' work. But he did not press her further, not yet. Instead, he turned to the window, his gaze drifting to the gardens below, where a groundskeeper was raking leaves in the morning mist. Very well, mademoiselle, he said, his voice calm but firm. I will keep this letter for now, with your permission, and I will ask you to remain in your quarters until I return. The truth, it has a way of revealing itself, and I, Hercule Poirot, will find it. Miss Claremont nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I didn't kill her, she whispered. I swear I didn't. Poirot inclined his head, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than belief, and left the room. The coded letter tucked safely in his pocket. The corridor was quiet now, the manor still waking from its slumber. But Poirot's mind was far from restful. The handkerchief, the coded letter, Miss Claremont's connection to Sir Henry, all were pieces of a puzzle that was beginning to take shape. He descended the grand staircase, his polished shoes clicking softly on the marble, and made his way to the library, where he had arranged to meet Inspector Japp, his old friend from Scotland Yard. Japp was already there, his broad frame hunched over a table cluttered with reports and photographs from the crime scene. He looked up as Poirot entered, his weathered face breaking into a wry smile. "Well, Poirot, you've been poking about, haven't you?" Japp said, pushing a photograph of the chalice toward him. "Found anything to make sense of this mess?" Poirot took the photograph, studying the intricate engravings on the chalice's surface. "The mess, as you call it, mon ami, is not so messy as it seems." The governess, Miss Claremont, she is hiding something. A letter, coded, and a past connection to Lady Beatrice's husband. I suspect she knows more than she admits. Japp raised an eyebrow. A coded letter. Sounds like something out of a Penny Dreadful. You sure she's not just a nervous spinster? Poirot's mustache twitched with amusement. Nervous, perhaps, but not without purpose. I will decipher this letter, and then we shall see what shadows it casts. He settled at the table, pulling a notebook and pencil from his pocket. The code was indeed a substitution cipher, each letter shifted by a fixed number of places in the alphabet. With methodical precision, Poirot began to work, his pencil scratching softly as Japp watched. Half impressed, half exasperated. An hour later, Poirot leaned back, a triumphant glint in his eye. "Voila," he said, sliding the deciphered text toward Japp. The letter speaks of a meeting held tonight before the gala, in the old chapel on the edge of the estate. It mentions the society and the plan, but no names. Yet, Japp whistled softly. "A secret society? You're pulling my leg." "Poirot, not at all, mon ami," Poirot replied, tapping the paper. "The governess, she is involved in something larger than a single murder. But is she the killer? That I am not yet certain." He rose, tucking the notebook away. "Come, Inspector, we must visit this chapel. The truth, it hides in the places where shadows are deepest." The chapel was a crumbling relic, half overgrown with ivy, its stained glass windows dulled by time. Poirot and Japp approached cautiously, the morning mist clinging to their coats. The door creaked as Poirot pushed it open, revealing a dusty interior lit by slivers of light. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and old wax, and Poirot's eyes scanned the pews, the altar, the walls there, he said, pointing to a small alcove near the altar. A candle stub, recently burned, sat beside a scrap of paper. Poirot picked it up, his gloved fingers careful not to smudge any prints. The paper bore a single word, chalice. Japp frowned. "What's this, then? A clue or a trap?" "Clue, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low. "But for whom?" "The governess. She knew of this place. She was here, or someone wished us to believe she was." They searched the chapel further, finding little else, a few footprints in the dust, too smudged to identify, and a faint scratch on the altar that might have been a symbol. Poirot pocketed the scrap of paper and led Japp back to the manor, his mind racing with possibilities. Miss Claremont's involvement was undeniable, but was she a pawn or a player? Back in the library, Poirot confronted Miss Claremont again, this time with Japp at his side. She stood by the window, her face pale but composed, as if she had steeled herself for this moment. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began, holding up the deciphered letter. "This speaks of a meeting in the chapel. Tonight's before Lady Beatrice's death. You were there, were you not? And this society, what is its purpose?" Miss Claremont's eyes widened, and for a moment Poirot thought she might faint. But then she straightened, her voice trembling but resolute. "I was there," she admitted, her words spilling out like a dam breaking. "But not to kill her. The society is a group of scholars, historians, studying the Ashburn family's past. Lady Beatrice, she found out about us. She threatened to expose us, to ruin our work. I was spying on her, yes, to protect our research. But I didn't poison her. I swear it. Monsieur Poirot." Poirot studied her, his eyes unyielding. "And this research, Mademoiselle, what is it that Lady Beatrice found so threatening?" She hesitated, her hands twisting together. "It's about the chalice," she said finally. It's not just a relic. It's tied to an old family legend, a curse. We were trying to prove it, to uncover the truth. But Beatrice, she wanted to sell it, to destroy its history. Poirot's mustache twitched again, a sign that he was close to a revelation. A curse, you say, and this society does it have. Others at Greystone Manor, she nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, but I won't name them. I can't. They're not murderers, monsieur. I swear it. Poirot exchanged a glance with Jap, who looked ready to arrest her on the spot. But Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm. Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. For now, you will remain here, under the inspector's watch, as they left the library. Jap muttered, You believe her, Poirot? All this talk of curses and secret societies? Poirot smiled faintly. I believe, mon ami, that the truth is like a shadow, it moves with the light. Miss Claremont, she has given us a piece of it, but the chalice, it holds the key, and I, Hercule Poirot, will find it. The chapter closed with Poirot standing by the manor's grand windows, the coded letter and the scrap of paper in his hands, his mind weaving the threads of the mystery into a tapestry that was almost complete. The governess's shadow had lengthened, but the true killer remained just out of reach, hidden in the intricate design of the poisoned chalice. Chapter 6. The financier's gambit. Morning sun filtered through the tall, arched windows of Greystone Manor, casting long, golden rays across the polished oak floor of the library, where Hercule Poirot sat. His small, meticulous hands were clasped together, resting on the arm of a high-backed chair, and his sharp, gray eyes scanned the room with a precision that missed nothing. The library, with its towering shelves of leather-bound tomes and the faint scent of aged paper, was a sanctuary of quiet amidst the storm of suspicion that had gripped the manor. Since Lady Beatrice's death, Poirot had chosen this room deliberately, for it was here that he intended to confront Mr. Percival Harrow, the financier whose polished exterior hid a tangle of motives that Poirot was determined to unravel. The events of the previous days had painted a vivid picture of the gala's attendees, each with their secrets and grievances against the late Lady Beatrice. Poirot's interviews had peeled back layers of deception, revealing Captain Worthing's desperate debts, Miss Claremont's shadowy past, and Dr. Varnell's thwarted ambitions. Yet, it was Harrow who intrigued Poirot most today. The financier's name had surfaced repeatedly in whispered conversations among the servants, and a chance remark from the butler about Harrow's late-night meeting with Lady Beatrice before. The gala had set Poirot's mind alight with possibilities. Poirot adjusted his tie, a subtle gesture that belied the intensity of his thoughts. He had requested Harrow's presence in the library at precisely 10 o'clock, and as the grandfather clock in the corner chimed the hour, the door creaked open. Mr. Harrow entered, his tailored suit impeccable, his dark hair slicked back, and a faint smile playing on his lips. He carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to bending others to his will. But Poirot noted the slight tightening of his jaw, the flicker of unease in his hazel eyes. "Good morning, Monsieur Poirot," Harrow said, his voice smooth, but tinged with caution. "I trust you summoned me for something more than a literary discussion." Poirot inclined his head, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Please, Monsieur Harrow, sit. It is not the books that interest me today, but the affairs of men and women, of course. Specifically, your affairs with Lady Beatrice." Harrow's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly, easing into the chair with a practiced grace. Not sure I follow, Monsieur. Lady Beatrice and I were acquaintances, nothing more. Business associates, perhaps, given her involvement in the charity fund." "Precisement," Poirot said, his tone light, but his eyes piercing. "The charity fund. A most noble endeavor, yet I have heard whispers most discreet. You understand that not all was well with this fund, that perhaps some sums were misallocated." Harrow's fingers twitched on the armrest. a movement so slight it might have gone unnoticed by anyone but Poirot. Whispers are dangerous things, Monsieur Poirot. They often lack substance. I assure you, the fun was managed with the utmost care. Poirot leaned forward, his mustache twitching slightly as if it, too, were assessing the man before him. Care, monsieur. I am certain you took great care. But to what end? I have examined certain documents, so do not look so surprised. For Hercule Poirot has his methods, and these documents suggest that the charity fund was not as robust as it appeared. In fact, it seems that significant sums were diverted, perhaps to cover personal losses. Harrow's face paled, but he maintained his composure. Crossing one leg over the other, he tread on dangerous ground, monsieur. Those documents, if they exist, could be misinterpreted. I had no reason to harm Lady Beatrice. She was a valued partner in our charitable work. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Let us dispense with the pleasantries, Monsieur Harrow. Lady Beatrice was no mere partner. She was a threat. Was she not? A woman of principle, who discovered your, let us call it, creative accounting. She threatened to expose you, to ruin your reputation, your empire. And so, perhaps, you ensured that our voice was silenced before it could speak. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Harrow's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Poirot thought he might rise and storm out. Instead, the financier leaned back, his smile returning, though it was colder now. You weave a compelling tale, Monsieur Poirot, but you lack proof. I was nowhere near the chalice when Lady Beatrice took her fatal sip. Dozens of witnesses can attest to that. Witnesses? Poirot mused, tapping his fingers lightly on the armrest. They are most useful, but also most unreliable. The eyes see what they wish to see, none. But let us not speak of witnesses yet. Let us speak of opportunity. You were at the gala, Monsieur Harrow. You had access to the banquet hall, to the chalice, and you had a motive most compelling. Harrow's composure cracked, his voice rising slightly. This is absurd. I had no reason to kill her. If anything, her death has complicated matters for me. The charity fund is now under scrutiny, and I'm the one answering questions. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet, you answer so well, monsieur. Too well, perhaps. But let us test your sincerity. I have a proposition, a little experiment, if you will. Suppose I were to produce evidence, irrefutable evidence, that you tampered with the chalice. What would you say then? Harrow laughed, a short, brittle sound. I'd say you're bluffing, Poirot. You have nothing but suspicions and a flair for the dramatic. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. He reached into his pocket and produced a folded piece of paper, holding it just out of Harrow's reach. This, monsieur, is a ledger entry, a most curious one. It details a transfer of funds, a significant sum, from the charity to an account in your name, dated mere days before the gala. Lady Beatrice's signature is absent, which is most irregular, none. I wonder what she would have said had she lived to see this. Harrow's face drained of color, his hands gripping the armrest tightly. That's impossible. You're fabricating this. Fabricating. Poirot's voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of certainty. None, monsieur. Hercule Poirot does not fabricate. But I am curious, why do you tremble so, if you are innocent, as you claim? This paper should mean nothing to you. Harrow sprang to his feet, his voice rising to a shout. This is a trick. You're trying to trap me. Poirot, I won't stand for it. Poirot remained seated, unruffled. Sit, monsieur. Your agitation does you no favors. Let us discuss this calmly. If you did not poison the chalice, perhaps you tampered with it in another way. A sedative. Perhaps something to make Lady Beatrice compliant before someone else delivered the fatal dose. The room fell silent, the only sound, the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. Harrow's shoulders slumped, and he sank back into the chair, his face a mask of defeat. You're relentless, Poirot. He muttered, "All right, I'll tell you what happened. But you won't like it." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Harrow's face. "Speak." "Monsieur, the truth is all I seek." Harrow took a deep breath, his voice low and strained. "I did tamper with the chalice, not with poison. I swear." It was a mild sedative, meant to make Beatrice drowsy, to keep her from making a scene at the gala. She'd been asking too many questions about the fun, threatening to go public. I thought if she were indisposed, I could buy time to cover my tracks. But I didn't kill her. The poison that wasn't me. Poirot's expression remained impassive, though his mind was racing. "A sedative, you say. Most interesting. And how, monsieur? Did you administer this sedative?" Harrow hesitated, his eyes darting to the door as if contemplating escape. I slipped it into the chalice during the pre-gala preparations. It was easy enough, the servants were distracted, and I knew which chalice was hers. But it was only a sedative. Poirot, I tested it myself, it couldn't have killed her. Poirot's mustache twitched. "And yet, she is dead, monsieur. The chalice contained a poison, not a sedative. A most lethal toxin, as confirmed by the analysis. How do you explain this?" Harrow's hands shook, his voice barely a whisper. I can't. Someone must have tampered with it after me. I swear." "Poirot, I didn't want her dead." Poirot rose, his movements deliberate, and paced slowly before the fireplace. "Let us assume, for a moment, that you speak the truth. You placed a sedative in the chalice, but someone else, someone with darker intentions, replaced it with poison. Who, monsieur? Who had such access, such motive?" Harrow shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. "I don't know. I swear, I don't know. I thought I was the only one. But there were so many people at the gala. Anyone could." "Have anyone?" Poirot interrupted, his voice sharp. "None, monsieur. Not anyone. Someone with knowledge of the chalice. Someone who knew it was Lady Beatrice's. Someone who moved with purpose in the chaos of the gala. You will help me find this person, Monsieur Harrow, or you will face the consequences of your actions alone." Harrow buried his face in his hands, his shoulders trembling. Poirot watched him closely, noting every detail, the sweat on his brow, the rapid rise and fall of his chest. The financier was broken, but Poirot's instincts told him that Harrow's story, while plausible, was incomplete. There was another layer to this mystery, a deeper truth that lay just out of reach. The library door opened, and Inspector Grayson, the local police officer assigned to the case, entered with 2 constables. Poirot had summoned them earlier, anticipating the need for swift action. Grayson, a stout man with a no-nonsense demeanor, nodded to Poirot. "Is it time, Monsieur Poirot?" "Oui, Inspector," Poirot said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Monsieur Harrow has admitted to tampering with the chalice, though he claims his intention was not to kill. Take him into custody, if you please, while we verify his story. The forensic analysis will confirm whether a sedative was present alongside the poison." Harrow's head snapped up, his eyes wild. "You can't do this. I told you the truth." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "The truth, monsieur, is a slippery thing. You have given me a piece of it, but not the whole. Until I have all the pieces, you will remain under suspicion. Inspector, take him away." The constables moved forward, and Harrow rose reluctantly, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As he was led out of the library, he cast a final, pleading glance at Poirot, who met it with an unyielding stare. The door closed behind them, leaving Poirot alone in the quiet room. He returned to his chair, his mind a whirl of deductions. Harrow's confession was a breakthrough, but it raised more questions than it answered. If Harrow had indeed used a sedative, who had replaced it with poison? The chalice had been under scrutiny since the moment of Lady Beatrice's collapse, yet someone had managed to alter its contents without detection. The precision required suggested a mind as calculated as Poirot's own mind, that had planned every detail with meticulous care. Poirot's thoughts turned to the other guests. Captain Worthing, now detained, but cleared of the poisoning itself, had been desperate enough to flee. Miss Claremont's coded letter hinted at a broader conspiracy, one that might extend beyond the manor's walls. Dr. Varnell, though eliminated as the primary suspect, had access to toxins that could have been used. And then there was Lord Ashburn, whose financial troubles and strained relationship with his sister made him a figure of growing interest. The library's silence was broken by the soft creak of the door, and Mrs. Henshaw, the housekeeper, entered with a tray of tea. She was a stout woman in her 50s, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her expression one of quiet efficiency. "Your tea, Monsieur Poirot," she said, setting the tray on the table beside him. "I hope it's to your liking." "Merci, madame," Poirot said, his tone polite but distracted. He studied her for a moment, noting the way her hands lingered on the tray, the slight hesitation in her movements. "You have been with the Ashburn family for many years, non?" Mrs. Henshaw nodded, her eyes flickering with something Poirot could not quite place. 30 years, sir. I came to Greystone Manor as a young woman, before Lord Reginald was born." "Then you knew Lady Beatrice well," Poirot said, pouring himself a cup of tea. "Tell me, madam, what was her relationship with Monsieur Harrow like? Were they close?" Mrs. Henshaw's lips tightened, and she busied herself with adjusting the tray. "Lady Beatrice was a private woman, sir. She and Mr. Harrow worked together on the charity fund, but I wouldn't say they were close. She was particular about who she trusted." "And did she trust Monsieur Harrow?" Poirot pressed, his voice gentle but insistent. The housekeeper hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't think so, sir. Not lately. I overheard her speaking to Lord Reginald a few days before the gala. She said something about the fund not adding up, and that she'd have to confront Mr. Harrow about it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Most interesting. And did she confront him, madam?" "I couldn't say, sir," Mrs. Henshaw replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But she was upset that night, more than usual." Poirot nodded, dismissing her with a polite smile. "Merci, madam. You have been most helpful." As the housekeeper left, Poirot sipped his tea, his mind racing. Mrs. Henshaw's words confirmed what he had suspected. Lady Beatrice had been on the verge of exposing Harrow's embezzlement. But had Harrow acted alone, or was he a pawn in a larger scheme? The possibility of a second tamperer, someone who had replaced the sedative with poison, suggested a conspiracy that reached deeper than Poirot had initially imagined. He rose and crossed to the window, gazing out at the manor's sprawling gardens. The gala had been a carefully orchestrated event, with every detail planned by Lord Ashburn and his staff. The chalice, a family heirloom, had been chosen specifically for Lady Beatrice, a fact that had not escaped Poirot's notice. Someone had known which chalice was hers, someone who had access to the banquet hall before the guests arrived. The list of suspects was narrowing, but the truth remained elusive. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Ellis, the forensic analyst who had been examining the chalice, a weary man with spectacles perched on his nose. Dr. Ellis carried a leather case and a look of quiet excitement. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, setting the case on the table, "I've completed the analysis you requested. The results are intriguing." Poirot's mustache twitched with anticipation. "Speak, monsieur. What have you found?" Dr. Ellis opened the case, revealing a series of vials and papers. The chalice contained two distinct substances. The first, as Mr. Harrow claimed, was a sedative, a mild barbiturate, commonly used to induce drowsiness. It was present in trace amounts, consistent with his story of tampering. But the second substance, he paused, adjusting his spectacles. It was a rare alkaloid poison, derived from a South American plant, lethal in small doses, and virtually undetectable without specialized equipment. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And this poison, monsieur, it was the cause of Lady Beatrice's death?" "Undoubtedly, Dr. Ellis replied. The sedative would have made her drowsy, perhaps disoriented. But the poison was what stopped her heart. The combination is curious, though. It suggests that the poison was added after the sedative, possibly by someone who knew the chalice had already been tampered with. Poirot nodded, his mind piecing together the puzzle. And the chalice itself, any fingerprints, any signs of tampering? Dr. Ellis shook his head. None, monsieur. The chalice was wiped clean, which is consistent with the lack of fingerprints. You noted at the scene. Whoever did this was careful, very careful. Merci, doctor, Poirot said. Dismissing him, your findings are most illuminating. As Dr. Ellis left, Poirot returned to his chair, his fingers steepled before him. The presence of the substances in the chalice was a revelation, but it complicated the mystery. Harrow's confession, while damning, did not account for the poison. Someone else had intervened, someone with access to a rare toxin and the knowledge to use it. The list of suspects flashed through Poirot's mind. Captain Worthing, Miss Claremont, Dr. Varnell, Lord Ashburn, and now, perhaps, someone else entirely. He rose and began to pace, his steps measured and deliberate. The library, with its rows of books and quiet elegance, seemed to close in around him, as if urging him to uncover the truth hidden within its walls. Poirot's mind returned to the gala, to the moment Lady Beatrice had raised the chalice to her lips. The room had been crowded, the guests distracted by music and conversation. Yet someone had moved with purpose, slipping through the chaos to deliver a fatal dose. The day wore on, and Poirot continued his investigation, summoning servants and guests for further interviews. The butler, Mr. Grayson, confirmed that the chalice had been placed on the pedestal by a footman under Lord Ashburn's instructions. The footman, a nervous young man named Thomas, swore he had handled the chalice with gloves, as was customary for the manor's heirlooms. No one, it seemed, had touched it directly except, perhaps, the killer. By late afternoon, Poirot had gathered enough information to stage his next move. He requested a meeting with Lord Ashburn, Miss Claremont, and the remaining guests in the banquet hall where the tragedy had occurred. The room, now cleared of its festive decorations, felt cold and somber, the memory of Lady Beatrice's collapse lingering in the air. As the guests assembled, Poirot stood before the pedestal where the chalice had rested, his presence commanding. Attention, mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice clear and resonant. We stand in the very place where Lady Beatrice met her end. A chalice, a symbol of celebration, became an instrument of death. Monsieur Harrow has confessed to tampering with it, but he claims he used only a sedative. The poison, however, tells a different story. Someone in this room, or someone who was here that night, knew of Harrow's plan and used it to their advantage. A murmur rippled through the group, but Poirot raised a hand for silence. I have examined the evidence, the movements of each of you, the opportunities you had, and I am so close to the truth. But I require one final piece of the puzzle. Tonight, we will reenact the gala. You will take your places as you were that night, and we shall see what the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot can uncover. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared to protest. Lord Ashburn, his face pale and drawn, nodded reluctantly. Very well, Monsieur Poirot, let us do as you ask. The reenactment was meticulous, with Poirot directing each guest to their position at the moment of the poisoning. He watched their movements, their expressions, searching for the telltale sign of guilt. Miss Claremont stood near the edge of the room, her eyes darting nervously. Lord Ashburn lingered near the pedestal, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. The remaining guests, minor figures from the gala, including a few distant cousins and business associates, moved stiffly, aware of Poirot's scrutiny. As the reenactment progressed, Poirot's attention was drawn to a small detail: the placement of the chalice. During the gala, it had been positioned on the pedestal in such a way that only someone standing directly beside it could have tampered. with it unnoticed. Yet the pedestal was in full view of the room, making such an act risky. Poirot's mind flashed to the secret passage he would later discover. But for now, he focused on the guests. Lord Ashburn, Poirot said suddenly, turning to the host. You were near the pedestal when the chalice was brought out. Did you see anyone approach it? Ashburn shook his head, his voice strained. No, Monsieur Poirot. I was distracted, greeting guests, ensuring everything was in order. And you, Miss Claremont? Poirot turned to the governess, whose face was pale but composed. You were standing not far from here. Did you see anything unusual? Miss Claremont hesitated, then shook her head. Nothing, monsieur. It was a crowded room. I was watching the dancers. Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. The reenactment continued, with Poirot moving among the guests, asking questions, observing. At last, he paused before the pedestal, his fingers brushing the smooth wood. This chalice, he said softly, almost to himself, it holds the key, not just to the poison, but to the heart of this mystery. Someone knew it was Lady Beatrice's. Someone ensured it reached her lips. The room was silent, the tension palpable. Poirot turned to face the group, his voice rising. I will find this person, mesdames et messieurs. The truth cannot hide from Hercule Poirot, and when I uncover it, the guilty will face justice. The reenactment ended, and the guests dispersed, their faces a mixture of relief and unease. Poirot remained in the banquet hall, his mind working tirelessly. Harrow's confession had been a step forward, but the presence of the poison suggested a deeper plot. The financier's gambit had been exposed, but Poirot sensed that the true mastermind was still at large, waiting as the sun set over Greystone Manor, casting long shadows across the grounds. Poirot returned to the library, his notebook in hand. He sketched a diagram of the banquet hall, marking the positions of the guests, the pedestal, the chalice. Somewhere in this web of motives and opportunities lay the truth, and Poirot was determined to find it. The chapter closed with Poirot alone, his eyes fixed on the diagram, his mind a storm of deductions. Harrow's arrest had shaken the manor, but the mystery was far from solved. The poison, the passage, the motives, they all pointed to a conspiracy that reached beyond one man's greed. Poirot's little gray cells were alight with purpose, and he knew that the next revelation would bring him closer to unmasking the killer. Chapter 7. The Hidden Passage. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand banquet hall of Greystone Manor, his keen eyes scanning the opulent surroundings. The room, still heavy with the scent of spilled champagne and lingering fear, seemed to hold its secrets tightly. The gala, now a distant memory marred by Lady Beatrice's death, had left an indelible mark on the manor's polished floors and gilded walls. Poirot's small, precise steps echoed faintly as he paced, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind a whirl of calculations. The chalice, the deadly vessel, had been secured and sent for forensic analysis, but its absence did not diminish its presence and his thoughts. The mystery of its poison, the Locktroom conundrum, and the web of motives among the guests gnawed him. Yet, something about the manor itself, its very architecture, whispered of answers. Yet uncovered, the hall was vast, its high ceilings adorned with frescoes of cherubs and vines, its walls lined with oak paneling that gleamed under the chandelier's soft glow. Poirot's gaze lingered on the far wall, where a massive tapestry depicted a medieval hunt, its threads vibrant despite the centuries. He had noticed it during the gala, its weight and texture suggesting it concealed more than mere stone. His intuition, that infallible guide, urged him to explore further. The guests had been interviewed, their alibis probed, their secrets partially unearthed, but the manor itself had not yet spoken, and Poirot, ever the listener, intended to make it confess. He approached the tapestry, his fingers brushing the heavy fabric. It was cool to the touch, its embroidered stags and hounds frozen in eternal pursuit. With a gentle tug, he tested its weight. It resisted, as if anchored. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. Mon Dieu, he murmured, you are not so innocent as you appear. He ran his hands along the edges, feeling for irregularities. Near the bottom right corner, his fingers caught on a slight ridge in the paneling beneath. A press, a click, and a soft groan of wood rewarded his persistence. The panel shifted inward, revealing a narrow gap just wide enough for a man to slip through. Poirot stepped back, his heart quickening with the thrill of discovery. A hidden passage, this was no mere architectural quirk, in a manner as old as Greystone. Such secrets were not uncommon, but their purpose was rarely innocent. He retrieved a small flashlight from his pocket, a tool he carried for precisely such moments, and directed its beam into the darkness. The passage stretched beyond the light's reach, its walls rough-hewn stone, its floor coated in a fine layer of dust. Footprints, faint but unmistakable, marked the path. Someone had been here, and recently, with the care of a man who valued his polished shoes, Poirot stepped into the passage. The air was cool and musty, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. The beam of his flashlight danced across the walls, revealing cobwebs and the occasional scurry of a disturbed insect. The footprints, he noted, were uneven, some deeper, some smudged, as if the intruder had moved in haste. He followed them, his steps deliberate, his mind cataloging every detail. The passage sloped downward slightly, then turned sharply to the left. After a dozen paces, it widened into a small chamber, barely large enough for two people to stand abreast. In the center of the chamber stood a wooden crate, its lid askew. Poirot knelt beside it, his flashlight illuminating a collection of odds and ends, a rusted candelabrum, a cracked porcelain vase, and, curiously, a single leather glove. He examined the glove, noting its fine stitching and the faint monogram R.A. embroidered on the cuff. Reginald Ashburn, perhaps, or another with those initials. Poirot tucked the glove into his pocket, his mind already weaving connections. The crate, he reasoned, was a temporary hiding place, its contents discarded rather than cherished. But the glove it was to find, too personal to be left carelessly. The passage continued beyond the chamber, and Poirot pressed on his flashlight, revealing more footprints. They led to a narrow staircase that spiraled upward, its steps worn smooth by time. He climbed carefully, counting 30 steps before reaching a wooden door. Its surface scarred and unpainted, he tested the handle. It turned with a faint creak. Beyond lay a narrow corridor, its walls lined with plain plaster rather than the manor's usual opulence. Poirot's instincts told him he was nearing the servants' quarters, a place where secrets were often kept. The corridor ended at another door, this one slightly ajar. Poirot pushed it open and found himself in a small, cluttered room. A narrow bed, a wooden chair, and a desk piled with papers greeted him. The room smelled of wax and tobacco, and a single window, barely a slit, let in a sliver of moonlight. This, he realized, was the butler's quarters. Mr. Giles, the stoic servant who had overseen the gala with mechanical precision. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he scanned the room. A torn piece of paper caught his attention, half buried under a ledger on the desk. He retrieved it, noting its texture and the faint embossing of Greystone Manor's crest. It was an invitation to the gala, but its lower half was missing, as if deliberately torn. Poirot's fingers traced the jagged edge. Curio, he murmured. An invitation in the butler's room was not unusual. Servants often handled such things, but a torn one suggested intent. He searched the desk further, his movements swift but methodical. Beneath a stack of receipts, he found a small glass vial, its label faded but legible, Aconitum napellus, monkshood, the poison that had killed Lady Beatrice. Identified by the forensic report Poirot had received that morning. His pulse quickened, though his expression remained impassive. The vial was empty, but its presence in Giles's room was damning. He stepped back, his mind racing. The butler had been omnipresent during the gala, his movements unobtrusive yet constant. He had served the drinks overseeing the staff, and, crucially, had access to the chalice before it reached Lady Beatrice. But why? Giles had no apparent motive, no financial ties to Beatrice, no personal grudges that Poirot had uncovered. Yet the vial and the torn invitation suggested otherwise. Poirot returned to the passage. Retracing his steps to the banquet hall, he emerged behind the tapestry, ensuring the panel clicked shut behind him. The hall was empty now, the guests long dismissed to their rooms or the local and under police supervision. Poirot stood still, reconstructing the gala in his mind. The chalice had been placed on a pedestal near the center of the room, a ceremonial flourish insisted upon by Lord Ashburn. Giles had been seen adjusting its position moments before Beatrice took her fatal sip. The passage, with its direct route to the butler's quarters, offered a perfect means of escape or delivery. He sought out Giles, finding him in the kitchen overseeing the cleanup of shattered glassware. The butler was a tall, gaunt man in his 50s, his face etched with lines of duty and discretion. His eyes, however, betrayed a flicker of unease as Poirot approached him. Monsieur Giles, Poirot began, his tone polite but firm. A word, if you please. Giles set down a tray of broken flutes, his hand steady but his jaw tight. Of course, Mr. Poirot. How may I assist? Poirot held up the torn invitation, watching Giles's reaction. The butler's eyes widened briefly before he scolded. His expression, an invitation, Monsieur, Poirot said, found in your quarters, torn, as if to conceal something. And this, he produced the vial, holding it delicately between the fingers. Aconitum napellus, a most deadly poison. None. Care to explain? Giles's face paled, but he recovered quickly. I don't know what you're implying, sir. That invitation must have been displaced servants handle many such papers. As for the vial, I've never seen it before. Someone must have placed it there. Poirot tilted his head, his mustache twitching. Someone, you say? A convenient explanation, monsieur. Yet the passage, oh, yes. I have found it leads from the banquet hall to your room. Footprints suggest recent use. And you, I recall, were near the chalice before Lady Beatrice's death. Coincidence? Perhaps. Giles's hands trembled, though he clasped them tightly behind his back. I swear, sir, I know nothing of any passage or poison. I serve the gala is always nothing more. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet, Monsieur Giles, you mentioned to me yesterday that Lord Ashburn has been troubled of late. Financial difficulties, none. Debts that Lady Beatrice refused to cover. Tell me, did your loyalty to your master ever waver? Or perhaps it was strengthened by another's offer? Giles stiffened, his voice low. I've served the Ashburns for 30 years. My loyalty is unquestioned. As for debts, yes, Lord Reginald has struggled. But that's no secret. Lady Beatrice was less generous than she might have been. But I had no hand in her death. Poirot nodded, as if satisfied, though his mind was far from settled. Very well, monsieur. We shall see what the footprints and the vial reveal under closer scrutiny. For now, I suggest you remain accessible. As Giles returned to his duties, Poirot retreated to the library, a quiet sanctuary lined with leather-bound tomes. He spread a sheet of paper on a mahogany table and began sketching a map of the passage, marking its entry points, the chamber, and the butler's quarters. The footprints, he noted, were varied, some large, some small, suggesting multiple users, or deliberate deception. The glove, with its RA monogram, could implicate Lord Ashburn, but its presence in the crate felt staged, as if to divert suspicion. The vial, however, was less ambiguous. Its match to the poison was no coincidence. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. The butler's denial was expected, but his unease hinted at knowledge, if not guilt. Giles's mention of Ashburn's debts aligned with Poirot's earlier findings. Beatrice's will, which he had discreetly reviewed, named Reginald as her sole heir. A motive, certainly, but too obvious for a man as cautious as Ashburn. The passage, though, changed everything. It offered access, opportunity, and secrecy. Someone had used it to deliver the poison or escape scrutiny, and Giles, with his intimate knowledge of the manor, was ideally placed to facilitate it. The night deepened, and Poirot's thoughts turned to the other guests: Mr. Harrow's embezzlement, Captain Worthing's debts, Miss Claremont's coded letter, all were threads in a tapestry of deceit. Yet the passage pointed to someone within the manor's inner circle, someone who knew its secrets. Ashburn himself could not be dismissed. His nervous demeanor during Poirot's earlier questioning, his insistence on the chalice's ceremonial use, these were not the actions of an innocent man. Poirot resolved to test his theory. He summoned Inspector Davies, the local police officer assigned to the case, and requested a discreet search of the passage for additional evidence. Davies, a stout man with a penchant for efficiency, agreed, though his skepticism of Poirot's methods was evident. A passage, you say? Sounds like something out of a novel. Mr. Poirot, life, Inspector, is often more novelistic than we care to admit, Poirot replied, his eyes twinkling by dawn. The search yielded results. A second vial, half hidden in a crevice near the passage's entrance, bore traces of the same poison. A scrap of fabric, caught on a splintered beam, matched the butler's uniform. Most damningly, a partial fingerprint on the vial matched none of the guests but aligned with Giles's, as confirmed by a quick comparison to a glass he had handled. Poirot presented these findings to Giles in the kitchen, his tone deceptively mild. Monsieur Giles, the evidence accumulates. A vial, a fingerprint, a passage you claim not to know. Shall we continue the charade, or will you speak plainly? Giles's shoulders slumped, his face a mask of defeat. Had I found the vial, sir, in the passage, after the gala, I didn't know what it was, but I feared it would implicate me. I hid it in my room, meaning to dispose of it later. I swear I didn't use it. And the passage? Poirot pressed. You knew of it. Giles hesitated, then nodded. It's an old secret, known only to the family and a few trusted servants. I used it once or twice, years ago, to move discreetly during events. But not that night. I swear it. Poirot's expression softened, though his mind remained sharp. Very well, monsieur. For now, you remain here. But know this. Hercule Poirot does not rest until the truth is laid bare. As Giles retreated, Poirot returned to his map, adding the new evidence. The passage was a key, but not the only one. Ashburn's debts, Giles's loyalty, the mysterious glove, all pointed to a conspiracy broader than a single killer. The chalice, with its intricate design, still held secrets, and Poirot suspected its inscription, glimpsed but not yet deciphered, would unlock the next piece of the puzzle. For now, he was content to let the suspects stew, their nerves fraying. Under the weight of his scrutiny, the manor, with its hidden passages and buried secrets, was beginning to speak, and Hercule Poirot was listening. Chapter 8. The Lord's Burdenthy morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Greystone Manor, casting long shadows across the polished oak floor of the library where Hercule Poirot stood, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the towering bookshelves. The room, with its musty scent of aged leather and ink, was a sanctuary of knowledge. But today it felt like a battleground. Lord Reginald Ashburn, the enigmatic host of the ill-fated gala, sat in a high-backed chair, his face pale, his fingers drumming nervously on the armrest. The air was thick with tension, as if the very walls of the manor knew that Poirot was closing in on the truth. Poirot had spent the night piecing together the fragments of the case, his little gray cells working tirelessly to unravel the tangled web of motives and alibis. The secret passage discovered in the previous chapter had shifted the investigation's focus, and now every clue seemed to point toward the man before him. Ashburn, with his aristocratic poise and carefully curated charm, had been a peripheral figure in the early days of the investigation. But Poirot's instincts told him that the Lord's role was far more significant than he had let on. "Monsieur Ashburn," Poirot began, his voice soft but laced with an edge of steel. "It is time, I think, for us to speak plainly. The death of your sister, Lady Beatrice, is a tragedy, but it is not one that occurred in isolation. There are threads of greed, of desperation, of secrets that lead us to this moment, and I believe, monsieur, that many of those threads are tied to you." Ashburn's fingers froze mid-drum, and his eyes, a pale blue that seemed to reflect the cold light of the morning, met Poirot's with a flicker of unease. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice steady but strained, "I have cooperated fully with your investigation. I have answered your questions, opened my home to your scrutiny. What more do you require of me?" Poirot tilted his head, his mustache twitching slightly as he considered the man before him. "What I require, monsieur, is the truth, the whole truth. You see, I have observed you closely since the night of the gala. Your composure, it is admirable, but it is not without its cracks. A glance here, a hesitation there, these are the signs of a man who carries a burden. And I believe that burden is connected to the death of your sister." Ashburn leaned back in his chair, his posture rigid. "You speak in riddles, Poirot. If you have accusations, make them plainly." "Very well," Poirot said, stepping forward, his small frame seeming to fill the room with authority. "Let us begin with the matter of your finances. It is no secret, I think, monsieur, that Greystone Manor is a grand estate, but grandeur is costly, is it not? And your sister, Lady Beatrice, held the purse strings, did she not?" Ashburn's face darkened, but he said nothing. His silence as telling as any admission. Poirot continued, pacing slowly before the fireplace. "I have made inquiries, discreet ones, of course. It seems that Lady Beatrice was a woman of considerable wealth that you, as her brother, depended upon to maintain this estate. But there was tension between you, was there not? She threatened to cut you off, perhaps, to leave you to fend for yourself." The Lord's jaw tightened, and for a moment Poirot thought he might rise in anger. But instead, Ashburn let out a heavy sigh, his shoulders sagging. "Beatrice and we had our differences. She was strong-willed, determined to control everything. The estate, the family name, she saw herself as its guardian. But I am not a child, Poirot. I am a man of my own standing, a man with debts." Poirot interjected smoothly. "Debts that your sister refused to pay. Debts that, perhaps, drove you to desperation." Ashburn shot to his feet, his face flushed. "You dare accuse me of murdering my own sister for money?" Poirot raised a hand, his expression calm, but unyielding. "I accuse no one, monsieur, not yet. But the facts, they speak loudly. The secret passage we discovered that leads directly from the banquet hall to the butler's quarters, where we found a vial that matches the poison used to kill Lady Beatrice. And you, monsieur, were seen near the passage before the gala. A servant, loyal but not blind, has confirmed this." Ashburn's eyes widened, and he took a step back, as if physically struck. You cannot believe I would do such a thing? Beatrice was my sister, and yet," Poirot said, his voice softening, "sibling bonds are not always unbreakable. There is the matter of her will, you see. I have learned that Lady Beatrice intended to change it, to leave her fortune to a charitable cause, a cause that would have left you with nothing but this crumbling manor. Tell me, monsieur, what man would not feel the weight of such a loss?" Ashburn sank back into his chair, his hands covering his face. The room was silent save for the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Poirot watched him closely, noting the tremble in his fingers, the way his shoulders seemed to bear an invisible weight. This was no act, Poirot thought. The man was genuinely shaken, but was it guilt or grief? "I love my sister," Ashburn said at last, his voice muffled by his hands. "Yes, we argued. Yes, I needed her money. But I would never harm her, Never. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Then let us test your words, monsieur. I propose a reenactment of the gala, here in this very room. We shall recreate the events of the night, and I shall observe the truth. It has a way of revealing itself under pressure. Ashburn looked up, his face a mixture of confusion and dread. A reenactment. To what end? To uncover the truth. Poirot said simply, you will play your part as host, and the remaining guests, those who are still here, will play theirs. I have already arranged for the necessary preparations, the chalice, the champagne. The precise placement of each guest it will be as it was, and I, Hercule Poirot, will watch. The reenactment was set for that evening, in the grand banquet hall where Lady Beatrice had met her end. The servants, under Poirot's meticulous direction, had restored the room to its state on the night of the gala. The long mahogany table gleamed under the chandeliers, set with crystal glasses and silver cutlery. The silver chalice, now safely locked away as evidence, had been replaced with an identical replica, its intricate engravings catching the light. The remaining guests, Mr. Harrow, Miss Claremont, Captain Worthing, Dr. Varnell, and a handful of minor attendees stood awkwardly around the table, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. Poirot stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding despite his diminutive stature. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice carrying through the hall. Tonight, we return to the night of the gala. Each of you will take your place as you did then. You will move, speak, and act as you did. Do not deviate, for I will notice, and the truth, it will not remain hidden. The guests exchanged glances, some nervous, others defiant. Ashburn, dressed in a tailored suit that mirrored his attire from the gala, stood at the far end of the table, his face a mask of strained composure. Poirot noted the slight tremor in his hand as he lifted a glass of champagne, a detail that had not escaped him on the night of the murder. The reenactment began with the clinking of glasses and the murmur of polite conversation as the guests mimicked their actions from that fateful night. Poirot moved silently among them, his eyes darting from one to another, his mind cataloging every gesture, every glance. Miss Claremont, her face pale, hovered near the edge of the room, her eyes flickering toward the door. Captain Worthing, still shaken from his earlier confrontation with Poirot, laughed loudly at a jest, his eyes darting toward Ashburn. Mr. Harrow, his composure restored since his arrest, stood stiffly, his gaze fixed on the chalice. Dr. Varnell, now cleared, but still under suspicion, sipped his champagne with a scientist's detachment, as if observing an experiment. Poirot's attention, however, was fixed on Ashburn. The lord moved through the crowd with practiced ease, but there was a tension in his movements, a stiffness that betrayed his unease. As the reenactment reached the moment when Lady Beatrice had raised the chalice, Poirot signaled for a pause. The room fell silent, all eyes on the detective. Monsieur Ashburn, Poirot said, stepping forward, if you would be so kind as to take the chalice. Ashburn hesitated, his eyes darting to the replica chalice on the table. This is absurd, he muttered, but he complied, lifting the chalice with a trembling hand. Poirot watched closely, noting the way Ashburn's gaze flickered toward the pedestal where the chalice had stood, a detail that had not been part of the original scene. Interesting, Poirot murmured, loud enough for the room to hear. You looked at the pedestal, monsieur. Why? On the night of the gala, the chalice was already in your sister's hand. Yet now, you look to where it rested. Is there something there that troubles you? Ashburn's face paled, and the chalice slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the table. The room gasped as one, and Poirot's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. The truth, monsieur, he said softly. It is like a shadow. It follows you, no matter how you try to hide. I don't know what you mean, Ashburn stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. He sank into a chair, his hands shaking. I was nervous that night. The chalice, it was a family heirloom. I was worried it might be damaged. Damaged? Poirot raised an eyebrow. Or perhaps you were worried it might be tampered with. You see, I have spoken with a servant who saw you near the secret passage before the gala. He was reluctant, loyal to his master, but the truth, it cannot be silenced. He saw you emerge from the passage, monsieur, just minutes before your sister took the chalice. The room erupted in murmurs, and Ashburn's face crumpled. It's not what you think, he said, his voice breaking. I was in the passage. Yes, but not to poison her. I was meeting someone. A private matter. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A private matter in a secret passage with whom, monsieur? Ashburn's lips trembled, and he looked away, his gaze fixed on the floor. It was the creditor. I owed money, more than I could repay. I was trying to negotiate to keep it from Beatrice. She would have been furious, and this creditor, Poirot pressed. He was at the gala. Ashburn nodded, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, he was a discreet, but he was there. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low but piercing. And this creditor, did he have access to the chalice? Did he know of your sister's wealth, her refusal to aid you? Ashburn's head snapped up, his eyes wide with realization. You think he poisoned her to force me to pay? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned to the guests, his gaze sweeping the room. The poison. It was not a simple act of vengeance. It was calculated, precise. Someone knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew the chalice would reach Lady Beatrice. The question is, who had the opportunity, the knowledge, and the motive? The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Poirot turned back to Ashburn, his expression softening slightly. Monsieur, I do not believe you poisoned your sister, but you carry a burden, a secret that weighs heavily upon you. Tell me, who was this creditor, and what did he know of the chalice? Ashburn's shoulders slumped, and he buried his face in his hands. His name is Langley. Victor Langley. He knew everything. My debts, Beatrice's will, the chalice. He was at the gala, posing as a guest. I didn't think he would go so far. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Victor Langley, a name that had not yet surfaced in the investigation. A shadow player, hidden among the guests. The pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle was not yet complete. Langley's presence in the secret passage, his knowledge of the chalice, his motive tied to Ashburn's debt was a compelling thread. But Poirot knew there was more to uncover. The reenactment concluded, and the guests dispersed, their faces a mix of relief and suspicion. Poirot remained in the banquet hall, his eyes fixed on the replica chalice. Ashburn's breakdown had been genuine, he was certain. But the Lord's story raised new questions. Who was Victor Langley, and how had he managed to poison the chalice without detection? The secret passage, the vial, the footprints, they all pointed to a carefully orchestrated plan, one that required access and precision. Poirot returned to the library, where he found Ashburn still seated, his face ashen. Monsieur, Poirot said gently, you have taken a step toward the truth, and for that, I commend you. But we are not finished. This Langley, he must be found, and the chalice, it holds more secrets, I am sure. Tomorrow, we shall continue. Ashburn nodded weakly, his eyes distant. I never meant for any of this, he whispered. I only wanted to save the manor. Poirot placed a hand on his shoulder, a rare gesture of compassion. The truth, monsieur, it is a heavy burden, but it is one we must bear together. As Poirot left the library, the weight of the case pressed upon him. The chalice, the passage, the poison, it was a puzzle of exquisite complexity, and he was determined to solve it. Victor Langley was the key, but Poirot's instincts told him that the final piece of the puzzle lay elsewhere, hidden in the shadows of Greystone Manor. The night was still, the manor cloaked in darkness. Poirot stood at his window, gazing out at the moonlit gardens, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The chalice's inscription, the family curse. The secret society hinted at in Miss Claremont's letter. These were not mere coincidences. They were clues, fragments of a larger truth. And Hercule Poirot would not rest until every fragment was in place. Chapter 9. The chalice's riddle. Morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Greystone Manor, casting long, golden beams across the polished oak floor of the library where Hercule Poirot sat, his small, immaculate hands folded over a silver tray. On it rested the silver chalice, its intricate engravings catching the light like a web of secrets. The events of the past days, the gala, the poisoning, the tangled web of motives and alibis had brought him to this moment. The chalice, he knew, held more than poison. It held the key to unlocking the mystery of Lady Beatrice's death. Poirot's gray eyes, sharp as ever, studied the object with a quiet intensity, as though it might whisper its truths if he only listened closely enough. The library was silent save for the faint tick of a grandfather clock in the corner, its pendulum marking time with relentless precision. Poirot had requested solitude, and the household staff, still shaken by the revelations surrounding Lord Ashburn and the secret passage, had obliged. He leaned closer to the chalice, his gloved fingers tracing the air above its surface, careful not to disturb the evidence. The engravings were not mere decoration. He had decided they were deliberate. A message etched in silver. The question was, a message from whom and to what end? The chalice's design was ornate, almost ostentatious, with swirling patterns of vines and roses intertwined with what appeared to be runic symbols. Poirot had seen many such relics in his travels, objects of antiquity imbued with meaning by their creators, but this one struck him as peculiarly specific. The runes, if they were runes, did not resemble any standard alphabet he recognized. They were neither Norse nor Celtic, nor did they align with the cryptic scripts of the ancient Mediterranean civilizations he had encountered in his studies. No, these were something else entirely, and Poirot's mind, ever attuned to the unusual, latched onto their strangeness. He produced a small notebook from his waistcoat pocket, its leather cover worn but pristine, and began sketching the symbols with meticulous care. Each stroke of his pencil was precise, capturing the curves and angles of the engravings. As he worked, his thoughts drifted to the events of the previous evening, when Lord Ashburn's breakdown had revealed his desperation, but stopped short of a confession. Ashburn had denied murder, his voice trembling with a sincerity that Poirot found difficult to dismiss. Yet, sincerity was not proof, and Poirot knew better than to let emotion cloud his judgment. The little gray cells, as he liked to call them, demanded facts, and the facts were leading him inexorably toward the chalice. The door to the library creaked open, and Hastings, Poirot's ever-loyal companion, entered with a cautious step. "Poirot, old chap, I hope I'm not interrupting. The household's in a bit of a state after last night." Ashburn's locked himself in his study, and the servants are whispering about ghosts and curses. It's all rather theatrical, don't you think? Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile, though his eyes remained fixed on the chalice. Theatrical, mon ami, perhaps, but the theater of human nature is often where the truth hides, playing its part behind the curtains. Tell me, Hastings, what do you make of this chalice? Hastings approached, peering over Poirot's shoulder at the gleaming object. Well, it's a fine piece, I suppose. Bit gaudy for my taste, but it suits the grandeur of this place. You think it's important, don't you? More than just the vessel for the poison. Important. Poirot's voice was soft, almost reverent. It is, perhaps, the heart of this affair. The poison. It was the method. But the chalice, it is the story. And stories, Hastings, they always have an author. Hastings frowned, his honest face betraying his confusion. You mean to say someone chose this chalice specifically? Not just because it was handy. Precisement, Poirot replied, tapping his pencil against the notebook. The choice of the chalice was no accident. It is the singular, to deliberate, the engravings. They speak of intent, of history, and history, mon ami, is often a motive in itself. Hastings pulled up a chair. His curiosity piqued. So, what's the plan? You're not going to sit here staring at it all day, are you? Poirot chuckled softly. Patience. Hastings. The little gray cells, they work even when I appear idle. But you are correct, we must act. I require the assistance of someone with knowledge of obscure languages, perhaps a dialect lost to Tom. The symbols on this chalice, they are not mere decoration. They are a cipher, a riddle, and Poirot, he does not rest until the riddle is solved. He rose, tucking the notebook into his pocket, and carefully covered the chalice with a silk cloth. Come, Hastings, we shall visit the village. There is a scholar, a Miss Evelyn Warwick, who resides nearby. She is said to have an extensive collection of manuscripts, some dating back centuries. If anyone can decipher these symbols, it is she. The village of Greystone, a quaint cluster of stone cottages nestled in the shadow of the manor, was a short drive from the estate. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and wood smoke. Poirot, immaculate in his tailored coat and polished shoes, seemed almost out of place against the rustic backdrop, but his demeanor was one of quiet confidence. Hastings, driving the motor car, kept up a steady stream of chatter, speculating about the case and the various suspects. I still can't shake the feeling that Ashburn's hiding something, Hastings said, navigating a narrow lane. All that talk about debts and family honor, it's a bit too convenient, don't you think? Poirot tilted his head, considering. Lord Ashburn, he is a man burden, yes, but a burden does not always make a murderer. His emotions, they are genuine, but they may mask a different truth. We shall see, Hastings. The chalice will guide us. They arrive at a modest cottage on the edge of the village, its garden overgrown with ivy and late-blooming roses. Miss Evelyn Warwick, a woman of perhaps 60, greeted them at the door. Her silver hair was pulled into a neat bun, and her sharp blue eyes assessed Poirot with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice crisp but warm, I've heard of your reputation. And Captain Hastings, I presume, to what do I owe the pleasure? Poirot bowed slightly, his hat in hand. Mademoiselle Warwick, I am in need of your expertise. There is an object, a chalice bearing inscriptions that defy my knowledge. I believe they may hold the key to a most tragic affair at Greystone Manor. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. A chalice. You say, come in. Then, my study is a bit cluttered, but I dare say we'll find what you need. The study was a treasure trove of books and manuscripts, shelves groaning under the weight of leather-bound tomes and yellowed parchments. Miss Warwick listened intently as Poirot described the chalice, showing her his sketches of the symbols. She adjusted her spectacles, her fingers tracing the lines of his drawings with a practiced ease. These are not runes in the traditional sense, she said after a long pause. They resemble an obscure dialect from the borderlands, a region between England and Scotland, used by certain families in the 16th century. It's a form of ciphered script, often employed to conceal sensitive information, family secrets, curses, or oaths. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A family secret, you say? Can you decipher it? Miss Warwick nodded, though her expression was guarded. I can try, but I must warn you, Monsieur Poirot, such scripts often carry warnings. The families who used them were not above vengeance or betrayal. If this chalice is tied to Greystone Manor, it may point to a history best left buried. Buried or not, Poirot replied, the truth. It must be unearthed. Please, mademoiselle, proceed. She set to work, pulling several dusty volumes from her shelves and cross-referencing Poirot's sketches. With faded pages of script, hours passed, marked only by the scratch of her pen and the occasional murmur of discovery. Poirot sat patiently, his hands folded, while Hastings paced. his restlessness a stark contrast to Poirot's calm. At last, Miss Warwick looked up, her face pale. The inscription is incomplete, but I've pieced together enough. It reads, in part, beware the blood that betrays. It's a reference to a curse, or perhaps a warning, tied to a betrayal within a family. The chalice, I suspect, was a ceremonial object, used in rituals to seal oaths or to mark those who broke them. Poirot leaned forward, his voice low. And this family, mademoiselle, would it be the Ashburns? She hesitated. The script is associated with the Ashburn lineage, yes, but also with a cadet branch, a distant cousin, perhaps, who fell out of favor. There are records of a Lady Margaret Ashburn, banished from the family in the 18th century for reasons unclear. Some say she swore vengeance, claiming the family's wealth as her own. Poirot's mind raced, connecting this new information to the gala's guest list. A distant cousin. Attending incognito, could it be? He recalled a woman at the gala, introduced as a minor noble from a neighboring county, her face partially obscured by a fan, her demeanor aloof yet watchful. Lady Margaret, or someone claiming her name, had been present, unnoticed by most, but not by Poirot's keen observation. Thank you, Mademoiselle Warwick, he said, rising. You have given me much to consider. Hastings, we returned to the manor at once. The drive back was silent. Poirot lost in thought, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. The chalice's inscription, the curse, the banished cousin, it all pointed to a motive rooted not in the present, but in the past. A grudge carried across generations. Lady Beatrice, with her wealth and influence, had been the target. But why? And how had the poison reached the chalice? Back at Greystone Manor, Poirot requested the guest list from the butler, who, still shaken from the discovery of the secret passage, complied without protest. Poirot scanned the names, his finger pausing on one, Lady Margaret Devereux, listed as a guest from Yorkshire. The name was unfamiliar, but the title rang a bell. A quick inquiry with the housekeeper confirmed that Lady Margaret had arrived late, her face veiled, and had kept to the edges of the gala, speaking to few. Poirot's next move was to examine the chalice once more, this time with the inscription's meaning in mind. He summoned the manor's curator, an elderly man named Mr. Grayson, who had served the Ashburn family for decades. Grayson, with his encyclopedic knowledge of the manor's artifacts, was visibly nervous as Poirot questioned him about the chalice's origins. It's been in the family for centuries, sir, Grayson said, his voice trembling slightly. A gift, they say, from a foreign prince, though the records are vague. It's rarely used to valuable. You see, Lord Ashburn insisted it be brought out for the gala. To impress the guests. Insisted? Poirot's tone was sharp. And who handled the chalice before it reached Lady Beatrice? Grayson hesitated. The butler, Mr. Collins, prepared it. I saw him polishing it that afternoon, and he placed it on the pedestal in the banquet hall. But others had access, the servants. The guests. It was a busy evening. Poirot nodded, dismissing Grayson with a wave. The butler again. Collins had been a shadow in the background, his presence unremarkable yet constant. The vial in his quarters, the footprints in the passage, and now the chalice's preparation. All roads seemed to lead to him. Yet Poirot sensed a larger hand at work that evening. Poirot orchestrated a subtle confrontation. He requested Lady Margaret Devereux's presence in the drawing room, along with Lord Ashburn, the butler, and a few key servants. The room was lit by flickering candles, casting long shadows across the mahogany paneling. Lady Margaret entered, her face no longer veiled, but strikingly composed, her dark eyes meeting Poirot's with a hint of defiance. Lady Margaret, Poirot began, his voice calm, but commanding. Or should I say, Lady Margaret Ashburn, your presence at the gala was no coincidence. Next pause. The chalice, with its inscription of betrayal. It speaks to your family's history, a history of vengeance, perhaps. Her lips tightened, but she did not flinch. You are a clever man, Monsieur Poirot. Yes, I am an Ashburn by blood, though. The family cast out my ancestors long ago. Beatrice, with her wealth and arrogance, was a symbol of all they stole from us. I attended the gala to observe, nothing more, to observe. Poirot's mustache twitched, or to act. The chalice, it was poison, and you, with your knowledge of the family's curse, had reason to see Beatrice fall. The inscription, beware. The blood that betrays, it points to you, does it not? Margaret's eyes flashed, but her voice remained steady. I know of the curse. Yes, my grandmother spoke of it, a warning against those who betrayed the family's trust. But I am no poisoner. If you seek the truth, look to those closer to Beatrice. Look to the chalice's keeper. Poirot's gaze shifted to the butler, who stood rigid by the door. Mr. Collins, he said softly, you have been most discreet, yet the evidence accumulates. The vial in your quarters, the footprints in the passage, your handling of the chalice tell me. What is your role in this affair? Collins paled, his hands trembling. I did as I was told, sir. Lord Ashburn asked me to prepare the chalice. I had no knowledge of poison, yet the vial, Poirot pressed, it matches the poison's composition, and the passage. It leads to your quarters. You cannot deny the facts, monsieur. Collins stammered, his composure crumbling. I swear, I didn't. Someone else. It must have been placed there. Poirot turned back to Lady Margaret, his mind working rapidly. And you, madam, you claim innocence, yet your presence, your motive it is to convenient. Did you, perhaps, plant the poison to frame Lord Ashburn, to reclaim what you believe is yours? Margaret's face hardened. You accuse me without proof. Monsieur Poirot, I wanted justice. Yes, but not murder. Beatrice's death benefits me not at all. Her will names Ashburn, not me. Poirot stepped back, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the room. The pieces were falling into place, but one final thread eluded him. The chalice's riddle had revealed a motive, a history. But the act itself, the poison's delivery, remained obscured. He paced, his polished shoes clicking against the floor, his mind reconstructing the gala's events. Consider, he said, addressing the room. The chalice was no random choice. It was a symbol, a relic of betrayal. Someone knew its history, knew its power. Lady Margaret, you knew of the curse, but you are not alone in your knowledge. Lord Ashburn, you chose the chalice for the gala. Mr. Collins, you prepared it, and yet the poison it required precision, opportunity, and intent. He paused, his gaze settling on a servant in the corner, a young woman who had been silent throughout. Miss Eliza, he said, his voice suddenly gentle. You served the drinks that evening. You were near the chalice when Lady Beatrice took it. Tell me, what did you see? Eliza's eyes widened, her hands twisting in her apron. I didn't see anything, sir. I just poured the wine, like I was told. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low but firm. And who told you? Mademoiselle. Who instructed you to ensure the chalice reached Lady Beatrice? Eliza's gaze darted to Lady Margaret, then to Collins, before dropping to the floor. It was Mr. Collins, sir. He said the chalice was special, that Lady Beatrice wanted it. I didn't know it was poison, I swear. Collins started forward, his face flushed. That's a lie. I never. Silence. Poirot's voice cut through the room like a blade. The truth, it emerges. Does it not? The chalice, the passage, the vial all point to a plan, but not one of impulse. Lady Margaret, your presence was a catalyst, but you did not act alone. Mr. Collins, your loyalty to the Ashburns is well known, but to whom, precisely, does it extend? He turned to Lord Ashburn, who sat pale and silent in an armchair. And you, monsieur, your desperation, your debts, they made you vulnerable. But the chalice, it was your choice. Was it not? A choice guided, perhaps, by another. Ashburn's hands clenched, but he said nothing. Poirot continued, his voice relentless. The riddle of the chalice. It is not just a curse. It is a distraction, a veil for a deeper truth. Someone used the chalice's history to obscure their intent, to point fingers at Margaret, at Ashburn, at anyone but themselves. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room, then fixed on Lady Margaret once more. Madam, you admitted to seeking justice. Did you, perhaps, enlist another to act where you could not? To place the poison, to ensure the chalice reached its mark? Margaret's composure faltered, her hands trembling slightly. I may have spoken to someone, yes, a servant, a confidant, but I never intended murder, Monsieur Poirot. I wanted to scare Beatrice, to make her see the weight of our family's past. I told Collins to tamper with the chalice, to add a sedative, nothing more. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A sedative, you say, and yet the poison was lethal. Someone, then, took your plan and twisted it. Someone with access, with knowledge, with motive. He turned to Collins, who was now sweating profusely. Mr. Collins, you were the instrument, were you not? But whose hand guided you? Lady Margaret's or another's? Collins broke, his voice a hoarse whisper. It wasn't me. I swear, I only followed orders. Lady Margaret, she gave me the vial, said it was harmless. But someone else, someone came to me later, offered me money to switch it. I didn't know it was poison. I swear. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of triumph. And this someone, Monsieur, their name. Collins hesitated, his eyes darting to the door. It was Lady Margaret's maid, Anna. She said it was for the family, for justice. She gave me the vial, told me to make sure it reached Beatrice. The room erupted in gasps. But Poirot raised a hand for silence. Anna, he said softly. A maid, unnoticed, unremarkable. Yet she, too, is part of this tapestry. Where is she now? The housekeeper, standing near the door, spoke up. Anna left this morning, sir. Said she was visiting family in the village. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Then we must find her. And quickly. Lady Margaret, your plan, it seems, was hijacked by one with darker intent. The chalice's riddle has led us to betrayal, but not yours alone. He turned to Hastings, his voice brisk. Mon ami, fetch the motor car. We go to the village once more. The truth, it awaits us. The drive to the village was tense. Poirot's mind racing through the implications. Anna, a maid, had been the final piece. The one who turned a scheme of intimidation into murder. But why and for whom? The chalice's inscription, beware the blood that betrays, echoed in his thoughts. Was Anna tied to the Ashburn family, a descendant of the banished branch, like Margaret? Or was she a pawn in a larger game? They found Anna in a small cottage on the outskirts of the village. Packing a suitcase with hurried movements, she froze when Poirot entered, his presence filling the small room with an air of inevitability. Mademoiselle Anna, he said, his voice calm, but unyielding, you have much to explain. The chalice, the poison, the betrayal, it all leads to you. Anna's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't mean for her to die, she whispered. Lady Margaret, she told me about the family, about how Beatrice ruined us. She gave me a vial, said it would make Beatrice sleep, make her think twice about her arrogance. But then someone else came to me. They knew about the plan. They gave me another vial, said it was stronger, that it would teach Beatrice a lesson. And this someone, Poirot pressed. Who are they? Anna shook her head, her voice barely audible. I don't know their name. A man, cloaked, in the gardens the night before the gala. He gave me money, said it was for justice. I didn't know it was poison. Monsieur Poirot, I swear. Poirot's eyes softened, but his resolve did not waver. And the chalice, mademoiselle. Why that chalice? Anna's gaze dropped. Lady Margaret said it was symbolic, that it would remind Beatrice of the family's sins. I didn't know about the curse. Not really. I just did as I was told. Poirot nodded, his mind piecing together the final threads. Lady Margaret had orchestrated a plan to humiliate Beatrice, using the chalice as a symbol of their shared history. But someone else, someone with deeper knowledge, perhaps even of the chalice's inscription, had seized the opportunity, turning a sedative into a deadly poison. The question remained, who? He returned to the manor, Anna in custody, and gathered the key players once more in the drawing room. Lady Margaret, Collins, Ashburn, and the servants stood in a tense circle, their faces a mix of fear and anticipation. Poirot paced, his hands clasped behind his back, his voice steady as he began to unravel the truth. The chalice, he said. It was the key, but also the distraction. Lady Margaret, you sought to shame your cousin, to remind her of a past betrayal. You enlisted Mr. Collins and Anna, believing your plan was harmless. But another hand intervened, a hand that knew the chalice's history, its curse, and its power. This person ensured the poison was lethal, turning your scheme into murder. He paused, his eyes scanning the room. The question is, who had the knowledge, the opportunity, and the motive to betray not only Beatrice, but all of you? He turned to Lord Ashburn. You, monsieur, chose the chalice. You knew its history, did you not? And yet, you allowed it to be used, knowing it would draw attention, knowing it would point to your family's past. Ashburn's face was ashen. I thought it was just a relic, a piece of history. I didn't know about the poison. I swear. Poirot nodded, but his gaze shifted to the curator, Mr. Grayson, who had been silent throughout. And you, Monsieur Grayson, you who know every artifact in this manor. You spoke of the chalice's origins, but you omitted something, did you not? You knew of the curse, of the banished branch, of Lady Margaret's claim. Grayson's hands trembled, his eyes darting to the door. I don't know what you mean, sir. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low and relentless. You knew, monsieur. You knew the chalice's history, its inscription. You were the one who met Anna in the gardens. Were you not? You, who have served this family for decades, who knew of its secrets, its debts, its betrayals. You saw an opportunity to rid the family of Beatrice, to secure your own position, perhaps even to profit from the chaos. Grayson's face collapsed, his shoulders sagging. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I knew Margaret's plan, yes. I overheard her speaking to Collins. I thought, if Beatrice were gone, the family's debts might be forgiven, the manor saved. I swapped the vial, but I didn't. No, it would kill her. Poirot's eyes gleamed with triumph. And so, the chalice's riddle is solved. The blood that betrays was not just Margaret's, nor Anna's, nor even Ashburn's. It was yours, Monsieur Grayson. A betrayal of trust, of duty, of the very family you served. The room was silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them. Grayson was led away, his confession echoing in the stunned silence. Lady Margaret, her face a mask of guilt and relief, admitted to her role but was spared arrest, her plan having been subverted. Collins, too, was detained for his part, though his ignorance of the poison's lethality mitigated his guilt. As the authorities took over, Poirot stood by the window, gazing out at the manicured gardens of Greystone Manor. Hastings joined him, his voice quiet. You did it again, Poirot. Wrapped it all up neatly, didn't you? Poirot smiled faintly. Neatly, perhaps, but the human heart, Hastings, it is never neat. The chalice, it spoke of betrayal, and betrayal, it seems, is eternal. But for now, the truth is revealed, and that is enough. He turned, his hat in hand, and walked toward the door, leaving the manor and its secrets behind. Chapter 10. The final revelation. The grand drawing room of Greystone Manor shimmered with the weight of anticipation. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic glints across the polished mahogany furniture, their light dancing on the faces of the assembled guests. The air was thick with tension, as if the very walls of the manor held their breath. waiting for Hercule Poirot to unravel the tangled web of deceit that had led to Lady Beatrice's death. The silver chalice, now safely locked in a glass case, under police guard, sat at the center of the room like a silent witness to the crime. Poirot stood before it, his small, meticulous figure commanding the attention of all present. His mustache twitched slightly, a sign to those who knew him that his little gray cells were at their peak. The guests from the fateful gala were seated in a semicircle, their expressions a gallery of unease. Lord Reginald Ashburn, his face pale and drawn, sat at the head of the group, his fingers nervously twisting a gold signet ring. Beside him, the financier Mr. Harrow, his once confident demeanor replaced by a guarded scowl, shifted uncomfortably. Miss Claremont, the governess, sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes darting toward the door as if contemplating escape. Captain Worthing, his military bearing softened by the weight of recent events, stared blankly at the floor. Dr. Varnell, the chemist, adjusted his spectacles, his lips pursed in a thin line. And in the corner, Lady Margaret, the distant cousin whose presence had been a surprise to all, sat with a serene composure that belied the accusations leveled against her. The butler, Mr. Grayson, stood stiffly near the door, his face an unreadable mask. Poirot cleared his throat, his voice calm but resonant, cutting through the murmurs like a knife. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his Belgian accent lending an air of formality to the proceedings. "We are gathered here to bring clarity to the tragedy that has befallen Lady Beatrice Ashburn. A life has been taken, a poison delivered through the chalice of silver, and the truth, it has been obscured by lies, misdirection, and the frailties of the human heart. But Hercule Poirot, he does not permit the truth to remain hidden." He paced slowly before the group, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning each face with the precision of a jeweler inspecting a gem. "The affair of the poisoned chalice is no simple crime. It is a tapestry woven with threads of motive, opportunity, and betrayal. To unravel it, we must return to the night of the gala and examine each element with care." The scene of the crime. Poirot gestured toward the chalice, its intricate engravings catching the light. The chalice, it is the heart of this mystery. It was from this vessel that Lady Beatrice drank, and within moments, she was struck down by a poison most insidious. The poison, as we have learned, was a rare compound, one that leaves little trace and acts with devastating speed. But how did it come to be in the chalice, and who placed it there? He turned to the assembled group, his gaze lingering on each suspect. "Let us begin with the facts. The gala was a grand affair, with many guests moving to and fro, their actions obscured by the revelry. The chalice was placed upon a pedestal in the banquet hall, accessible to all yet guarded by none. The absence of fingerprints, it was curious. None. It suggested a careful hand, one that took precautions to avoid detection. But the chalice, it was not the only clue. Poirot reached into his pocket and produced a small, monogrammed handkerchief, its delicate embroidery gleaming under the chandelier's light. This handkerchief, found near the chalice, bore the initials MC. It was a careless mistake, perhaps, or a deliberate misdirection. But it led me to consider the movements of each guest during the critical moments before Lady Beatrice's collapse. The suspects and their motives. Poirot turned to Miss Claremont, whose shoulders stiffened under his gaze. "Mademoiselle Claremont, you were the governess, a woman of quiet demeanor, yet with secrets of your own. Your connection to Lady Beatrice's late husband was a revelation, suggesting a motive of revenge. The coded letter found in your room hinted at a secret society, a network of intrigue that might have driven you to act. Yet, when pressed, you admitted only to spying on Lady Beatrice, not to murder. Your tears, they were genuine, I believe, but they did not absolve you entirely." Miss Claremont's lips trembled, but she said nothing, her eyes fixed on the floor. Poirot moved on to Captain Worthing. "Captain, your charm and bravery are well known, But so too are your debts. Your affair with Lady Beatrice ended in bitterness, and her threat to expose you could have ruined your prospects. You fled when confronted, a sign of guilt, perhaps. But a witness placed you elsewhere at the moment of the poisoning. Your actions were reckless, but not murderous. Captain Worthing exhaled sharply, his relief palpable but tempered by the weight of scrutiny. Next, Poirot's eyes fell on Mr. Harrow. Monsieur Harrow, your financial empire was built on ambition, but also on deceit. Lady Beatrice's charity fund. It was your undoing, for she discovered your embezzlement. When I confronted you with falsified evidence, you admitted to tampering with the chalice, claiming you intended only to drug her. But the poison, it was lethal, and your story, it does not hold. Yet, I sense in you a man caught in a web not entirely of his own making. Harrow's scowl deepened, but he remained silent, his hands clenched into fists. Poirot turned to Dr. Varnell. Doctor, your laboratory held the tools of death-rare toxins, a journal of experiments. Your rivalry with Lady Beatrice over funding was bitter, yet your alibi, confirmed by the butler, was unshakable. The vial label I found suggested a connection to the poison, but you were not the hand that delivered it. Dr. Varnell adjusted his spectacles, his expression one of cautious relief. Finally, Poirot's gaze settled on Lady Margaret. Lady Margaret, you came to the gala incognito, your presence a shadow until uncovered. The chalice's inscription, a reference to a family curse, pointed to your motive, a historical feud with Lady Beatrice, a wrong you sought to right through vengeance. You admitted to planting the poison to frame Lord Ashburn, a plan most cunning. But was it yours alone? Lady Margaret's serene smile faltered, her eyes narrowing slightly. The hidden passage and the butler's Rollepwart stepped toward the fireplace, where a concealed panel marked the entrance to the secret passage he had discovered. This passage, Zamus, it was the key to the crime, hidden behind the banquet hall. It allowed unseen movement during the gala. Footprints in the dust led me to the butler's quarters, where I found a torn invitation and a vial matching the poison's composition. Monsieur Grayson, the butler, claimed ignorance, but his unease betrayed him. Grayson stiffened, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. I swear, Monsieur Poirot, I knew nothing of the poison. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Patience. Monsieur Grayson, let us proceed methodically. The passage. It was used by someone who knew the manor well, someone who could move unnoticed. The invitation, torn and discarded, suggested a plan disrupted. The vial. It confirmed the poison's source. But why was it in your quarters? And why did you speak of Lord Ashburn's financial troubles? Poirot turned to Lord Ashburn, whose face had grown even paler. Lord Ashburn, your sister's death made you her sole heir. A fortune that could erase your debts. Your nervous glances during the reenactment of the gala. Your presence near the passage. They suggested guilt. Yet, your emotional breakdown. It was not the act of a murderer, but of a man burdened by desperation. Ashburn's voice cracked. I swear, Poirot, I love my sister. I would never harm her. Poirot nodded, his expression softening. I believe you, monsieur. But the truth, it is more complex. The unraveling of the plot. Poirot returned to the center of the room, his voice rising with conviction. Let us reconstruct the night of the gala. The chalice was placed on its pedestal, filled with champagne for Lady Beatrice's toast. The poison, it was introduced not by one person, but through a chain of actions, each designed to obscure the other. Lady Margaret, you were the architect of this plan. Your knowledge of the family curse, your presence incognito, and your admission of planting the poison to frame Lord Ashburn all point to your intent. But you did not act alone. He turned sharply to Grayson. Monsieur Grayson, you were the instrument of this crime. Your loyalty, it was not to the Ashburn family, but to a rival house, one with a long-standing grudge against Lady Beatrice. You were bribed to ensure the chalice reached her hands, laced with a poison provided by Lady Margaret, the passage. It was your path, allowing you to slip the poison into the chalice unnoticed. The vial in your quarters, the torn invitation, they were your mistakes. Grayson's composure shattered, his face contorting with panic. No, I was forced. They threatened my family. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Who, monsieur? Who threatened you? Grayson's shoulders slumped, his voice barely a whisper. The Blackthorn family. They've hated the Ashburns for generations. They paid me to do it, to make sure Lady Beatrice died and Lord Ashburn took the blame. Poirot nodded, his expression grim. And so, the final piece falls into place. Lady Margaret. You allied with the Blackthorns, using their resources and Grayson's access to execute your plan. The handkerchief. It was a deliberate plan to cast suspicion on Miss Claremont. The poison. It was your creation, Lady Margaret, but delivered by Grayson's hand. Together, you wove a plot to destroy Lady Beatrice and her brother. Lady Margaret rose, her voice icy. You have no proof, Poirot. This is speculation. Poirot smiled faintly. None, madam. The vial in Grayson's quarters, it bears traces of your perfume. A scent I noticed when we spoke. The invitation, it matches paper from your estate. And Grayson's confession, it seals your fate. The resolution room erupted in gasps as the constable stepped forward. Summoned by Poirot's earlier signal, Lady Margaret's composure crumbled, her serene facade replaced by fury. You meddling fool, you think you've won. Poirot remained unruffled. I seek only justice, madam. And justice, it has been served. Grayson, trembling, allowed himself to be led away, his head bowed in defeat. Lady Margaret resisted briefly, but the constables were firm, escorting her from the room as the guests watched in stunned silence. Poirot turned to Lord Ashburn, who sat with his face in his hands. Monsieur, you are cleared of suspicion. Your sister's death, it was a tragedy born of greed and vengeance. But you must now rebuild. Ashburn nodded, his voice choked. Thank you, Poirot. I don't know how to repay you. Poirot waved a hand dismissively. The repayment, it is the truth. That is all Hercule Poirot seeks. As the guests dispersed, their whispers filling the air, Poirot lingered by the chalice. He traced its engravings with a finger, his mind already turning to the next mystery. The human heart, he murmured to himself. It is a puzzle more complex than any chalice. Greed, betrayal, loyalty all mingle in its depths, and yet the little gray cells, they prevail. The manor fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling over it like dust. The affair of the poisoned chalice was closed, but its echoes would linger in Greystone Manor for years to come.